Everyone got it, right?
I actually said that without looking at it. I got it, so I'll check. Yeah.
Okay. Is everyone good? Yeah? Okay.
Advantage one is fostering U.S. modernization, breaking off conventional nuclear stage, removes the only firepower nuclear war Channel. 18 stable deterrence, depend on survivability, new bomb and artillery systems as a threat, second strike, and blur the nuclear conventional distinction leaders consistently recognizes the only firepower nuclear war, low U weapons breakdown, the stage, voltage, BGS will spur nuclear response, complicating leaders' assessment, revives unacceptable aggressive charge, by nuclear system, there are major difference out, these things is not clear whether consider strategic ability useful frame for discussing cooperation without new shared understanding, new tech, increase the risk of escalation, and peer competitors' defensive real but aggressive U.S. modernization ensures nuclear conventional shift, stabilizes deterrence, is Russia all occur. 18 Russian strategies not diverged by ambiguities, feeding apprehension of Washington, the NPR first use set ignores actual strategy, which most recent doctrine emphasized non-nuclear deterrence, analysts argue change signals if they point to one convoluted system, Western analysts mystery statements official make global use hyperbole, couldn't expect news weapons will be relevant, only retaliation strategies, do not believe conflict would be limited to fully and labor Dr. TWW system or mention signal, deterrence by Pentagon official view Russia's decision making is threat in and of itself, playbook can relies on nuclear weapons no matter how you'd have disaster consequences, the U.S. Pacific size, their force posture capabilities in the long may Russia generate advanced conventional system, greater conventional weapons would deter aggressive action and address fears among NATO states and ship Russian citizens creating non-nuclear run for the escalation ladders, the more the U.S. had less nuclear weapons, the more Russia will rely on them during the lines between warfare. B is China, Zhao. 19 U.S. modernization created a new perception of mutual suspicion, risk, nuclear war. China strategies focus on reacting to and deterrence threats. Russia will be the most significant factor. New capabilities, abandoning sole purpose and broadening attack scenarios under years of efforts to convince experts the U.S. is sincere. A new doctrine sends a message to pursue force nationalist groups will become stronger as a result, driving a cynical understanding among China's policy community. Open-ended use makes an inevitable stage for relaxed mistake. There's no credible evidence China wishes to limit the use of military plunges incorporated unconditional and a few deeply military thinking, policy making, and operational training. D&Ws make suspicion that experts conclude the U.S. is generating an excuse to build up war fighting and build up its war fighting and independently modernization crushes allied confidence, causes armor rising interventionism, it goes nuclear weaver. Parts more 19 adding to our arsenal where the extended deterrent the idea is already renewed fears affirmed in private meetings with European nation allies in recent months. There's no evidence weapons would be effective. Smart modernization forgoes dangerous new weapons and does not hollow out funding for critical Pentagon priorities. Current assets protect our allies until very recently allies remain confident yet the current plan mysteries the political environment public sentiment is deeply against weapons. Leaders have a tough balancing act. It feeds the narrative that the U.S. is destabilizing official claims to be meant to justify new weapons dangerously burst conventional nuclear conflict will yield options telegraph that the United States is unreliable unless the nation develops out additional weapons. This undermines confidence in the U.S. as a reliable partner. Dialogue intended to reassure easily bleeding to sales pitches seems designed to convince partners to support capabilities that put them in greater risk. We have heard from officials in many allied countries that this shift has occurred. Custom new weapons are urgent for preventing arms race and eliminating division in alliances and reducing risk in nuclear warfare. And only operational action can solve A is crisis stability and norms. Tannenwald. 18 without a cautious effort to renew norms. They don't offer further cornerstone of renewed state would be, and if you adoption will be both doctrinal and operational doctrine eliminate preemptive capabilities and stabilizing warfighting strategies. It would reduce restraint modernization, would shape physical qualities of nuclear force and remove threats, strengthen crisis stability, would also make an absolute boundary between weapons, reducing nuclear surveillance, even for horsemen recognize no plausible scenario in first use, and in a few creates a political space to false you, in a few anchors existing policies, implicitly acknowledge leadership of virtue when states will disenfranchise. B is Trust Miller. 2, and a few requires states relinquish any first use starts and options policy will need to address the more difficult problem of war planning. A little weight has been given in the past, and a few pledges real policy would ripple through military posture and preparation. If you would need to be operational, which alter expectation commanders would reduce influence in military investment decisions. Teach radical low and not to convince the world, and if you is firmly in place militaries with the way they train, if you and grades the first use entirely out of the picture, purely deterrent force much smaller than present arsenals, and if you is taken seriously, produce a logical lens, sending direction of the crux of the issue, the sole superpower link capable to the objectives of the nuclear deterrent, so long as it remains case we started will make a little headway. Advantage 2 is Congress. Congress inevitably shapes nuclear policy through sole operational authority, but declining oversight effectiveness ensures oscillating failed policy right at all. 18 Congress has a responsibility creating and eliminating initiatives and appropriating funding oversight is shared by the Senate and House, conditioning funding and organizing agencies. The NDAA establishes spending ceilings and policy and legal guidelines. Congress gives lawmakers influence effective oversight is constrained by limited institutional knowledge and competing priorities. Prioritization, no upgrade arsenal met, less funding, and they had a chilling effect on new initiatives. You can see Congress working nuclear threat decisions and consume the task of now to reinvigorate congressional leadership in the face of an evolving threat. And first use is reverse causal. Only Congress solves A is appropriations. Modernization trades off focus and funding. Mecklen. 19 it's not whether the program is affordable, it's whether it's sustainable. It's clear from statements there's going to be significant disagreements. Historical solution is driver timelines, cost of weapon capability goes down. Republicans are locked into to believe oversight is required and committed to the leverage position that includes writing into law requirements. The money should not be spent unless programs are necessary. You will see some areas of agreement, but some new nukes might get stalled or killed. Both houses to support they can't get funded. This way our budget works. If the House refuses to even the Senate as dips can block it. And B is institutional authority, congressional inaction, expertise in communication. Benedict 18 presidential first use prevent Congress from acting clear preferences, secrecy prevented representatives from getting knowledge about capabilities and mistakes. This further empowers the nuclear monarchy with a congressional liberation representatives can make a decision about fundamental consequential issues. To make a decision, we need to have info about them requiring Congress participate in nuclear posture, provide members with assistance what is at stake, and improve ability to talk to colleagues about foreign policy legislation to limit the president's first use and necessary first step scenario. Scenario 1 is terrorism. Effective congressional nuclear policy making is key to WD safeguards right. Until an 18 threat reduction programs is origin, Congress legislation authorized funds to establish verifiable safeguards and guiding cooperative efforts to secure vulnerable stockpiles of warheads and innumerable passages of chemical weapons. CTR resulting in significant benefits and trust building between former adversaries. Initial focus expanded to materials around the world. Congress generally good with the executive lawmakers suggested profile programs in 2012 increase were followed by seat reduction, while Congress increased some programs that restrict cooperation with Russia and China. Congress would withhold an NSA's budget amidst uncertainty input. Constraints on the Defense Department's the NDA against prohibited funding for CTR without specific authorization. Congress and terrorists have the motives and the means of WD attack assures massive instability, retaliation. Ackerman Pence had 14 lone actors utilizing the WD would represent the upside of asymmetry, including juicing tectonic shifts and security, even in smaller scale. CBR represents the threat is increasing advances in tech, increased availability and knowledge, and the lone wolf and autonomous cells may be more likely to select CBRM because of asymmetry provide the only option to achieve our NDO things. Attacks will lead to disruption well beyond years immediately effective, irrespective of harm. Precision weapons exert psychological impact and it escalates globally. Extinction, Everglade, and Boise if terrorist groups succeed in evolving from low-tech attacks to high-tech one, there would be an unprecedented catastrophic scenario. Increasing global distress would spark rising tensions that could lead to nuclear use. Consequences include escalation, conflict, military unilateralism, and severe global economic depression. Breakdown key doctrine in relation to collapse and nuclear order behavior would change radically. Internal chaos by social networks threaten governance at all levels. Deepening mistrust in scenario 2 is democracy. Congressional nuclear restriction is key to suppress rising authoritarianism. A is institutional credibility. Brooks 18. I think to government buildings and defense contractors talk to task use Russia side and nuclear monarchy works and so far was given struck the president needs the right missile location and targets that we should not imagine more extensive consultative decision making guarantee wiser decision homogeneous particularly hierarchy setting when opera breaks on presidential decision group think levels to Iraq even those with serious reservation go a long way socially and most especially inside the beltway. Experts will say we only use the low weapons. This is full achievement. Moscow use runs very high risk of escalation. And B is international modeling. Baker in 16 days shows support for the dictatorship no longer for view this trend is worrisome. But there's one aspect of which autocracy is the norm. Nuclear weapons and nuclear despotism fly in the face of democracy, tyranny, nuclear oligarchy, endangering global population demands increased transparency, greater oversight, and less dictatorial launch procedure, restricting first use would go a long way towards delegitimizing nuclear czars and pushing public control stokes the fires of democracy both here and abroad and backslide causing extinction. Kasparov 17. The axis to factors your terror extremist parties nuclear and Russia and authoritarian U.S. retreat leadership against home democracy and nuclear decades stability strong institution allies politicians dictators operate only tactically case and can only be met by strategy. Democracy the only remedy for every crisis remains exacerbated by authoritarian regimes. America is required. There's no one else. There's no open more powerful than America being an admired democracy. The only alternative writer 17. Democracy causes peace evidence of empirical problems selectively to motivate avoid wars cause incite discontent support declines the casualties have played experimental methods of advantages over observational data to supply samples and non-random assignment systems. Democracy less likely to support use of force. The third is key studies of social diplomatic crisis of World War II and any other demonstrate democratic peace and social ability signal more effectively through audience costs or inability to manipulate opinion or secretly drag nation into wars. In the plan, the United States federal government should substantially increase operational restrictions on first use nuclear strikes. Solvency only Congress solves is effective oversight. Freeman enhancing a 9. Even if Congress only acts even after being goaded by courts of the president, we reach constitutional crisis when Congress engage after the fact relevance institutions and unbind unless Congress proactive and assertive checks and balances will not work. Congress will be second tier and security will be difficult to stand up to an assertive president. B is durable signaling Waxman 14. CC credible hand-tied commitments that have given high domestic repercussion they have significant incentives to refund for bluffing and positive role from Congress and the play of opposing parties is durable to foreign actors. This transparency magnified by legislative processes will provide more info to adversaries and base inherits make it difficult to conceal or misrepresent presidents faced with such constraints. President will incline to be more selective about making threats, and Trump has terminally ruined the executive reputation. Only external univocal action can solve Yarhi. Milo 19. The skeptical scholars by no means represent consistent adversaries started what the U.S. said and how to behave. The good reputation remains crucial for successful diplomacy. Reputations of the presidency as the road to Trump deserves blame, but not all of his signaling began to decline after Assad breached Obama's red line track record of flip-flopping threats and off-the-cuff assurances led to serious and consciously believed commitments can also provide transition. They will be less likely to make concessions. The President changed position on Afghanistan, Russia, and Syria, but his views remain fluid. Undermined signaling led to disasters where adversaries will misperceive red lines and misjudge reactions, especially in condition region where distress and bold adversaries to aggressively promote even the administration remains consistent. The president no longer the ultimate voice. Leaders are turning elsewhere with the domestic system polarized. Communicating has become more difficult than ever. The more bipartisan univocal, the less likely damage to credibility outlast tenure.
Okay. You're good?
Yeah.
Are any first-use nuclear strikes allowed after the plan?
No.
None? Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, unless we've been nuked first. But how do you
Yeah,
determine,
yeah, but
how
that's
do
the
we
second
determine
strike,
when
right?
we've been nuked first?
What?
How do we determine when we've been nuked first?
When a nuke.
Okay.
When someone's
Like-
deployed a nuclear weapon against
And
the United
that
States,
decision is made by the president, right?
Well, our argument is that Congress would then make that decision of what
Congress makes the decision. So the president's completely taken out of that decision-making process.
Well, yeah, like Congress needs more authority over
But
when
the
we
president still
deploy
has the
nuclear
football, so
weapons.
the president could launch a nuke if they wanted to.
only if Congress says that a first strike has been initiated against the United States, thus the president can issue a second strike.
Okay, so but
That's
the
like
president
just
has
the
the
way that it
football,
would
so
work.
they're authorized to make that decision.
I
Okay.
guess
I'm
like,
going to ask
the
some
plan
questions about
changes
the Congress advantage. Let's
when
talk about
the
this
president
democracy stuff. Which states around the globe are backsliding right now? that
kind of
we're-
lots of them.
Lots of them? Okay, and which
Yeah.
ones of those have nukes, which would model the plan?
Well, our argument is that nuclear czarism is becoming kind of like more preferable in the international
there's a
system. So
very-
even if countries don't have nuclear weapons, they will strive to have nuclear weapons.
They'll
to
strive to have
create-
nuclear weapons? Why would states strive to have nuclear weapons?
Well, because nuclear czarism is something that is preferable. They see all these other nuclear weapon states kind of having those things.
Which ones? Which
What?
states?
Well,
I
mean,
want to read defensive states.
I think
Which
that
ones?
the Baker evidence and the maybe not the
Okay.
Brooks evidence kind of talks about like, well, Baker for sure talks about how states. It doesn't give like exactly
Okay.
which specific
Why
states.
do authoritarian states like care about what the U.S. tells them to do, or the U.S. model that it creates for itself?
Well, our argument is that strong alliance networks and clear guidelines would create an incentive
But if they're already in
against
alliance
those
with us, there's a
adversaries.
selection effect going on when they're already more democratic. So the
Auth-
states which are backsliding are ones which would
Authoritarian
not be
states
in alliance
only
with
reach
us.
legitimacy when authoritarianism is spread throughout. So if democracy is spread because the United
Let's
States
talk
no
about
longer has
this
nuclear
terrorism
can solve the
scenario.
problem.
Your internal link card, this reef card, the bottom of it says that Congress did not pass any sort of nuclear safety stuff because congressional Republicans don't like Russia. How do you solve sort of the aversion that people in Congress have for engaging in sort of like W&D safety with other countries, which is the reason this card says that we're not cooperating on things like that?
Well, the top of the card does talk about verifiable safeguards that have been, like, of course, not all safeguards have happened. Our argument is that when Congress has more control over nuclear authority, it kind of creates like a bipartisan effect to control the way that nuclear weapons are
No, this card says that right now they've passed appropriations legislation and they're not willing to actually follow through.
Yeah. So there's like a couple reasons as to why that is true, right? Just for CTR, but obviously we read Ev above, like the reef stuff and both the first G stuff, as to how the plan would change the way that people think about nukes. But that is an example that there's no reason as to why that prevents cooperation. That's like the SQUO, right?
Yeah,
Only
I'm
reason
good.
we make that better because the app doesn't make people hate Russia.
I sent it out.
At least Republicans.
6 off, posture, Congress.
Do you mind if I use the stand?
No, go for it.
Thanks.
1, 2, 3.
You all good?
I'm good. Yeah, I don't think Dawn has them. You have them.
Oh, yeah, I'm good.
You good? All y'all good?
Interpretation, topical first use restrictions must restrict the president's discretionary authority to issue orders to the military commanding first use of nukes. 1. Executive power of the president refers to discretionary authority to execute the law less against us. In 94, executive power is sanctioned by the powers of the decision exercised by the chief executive by virtue of the authority granted by the Constitution or law. Executive powers are by definition discretionary. What marks the power of executive is that the decision how the powers exercised lies within the discretion of that person, and the executive any more than consult others. Violation of the plan restricts congressional power. The power to create and regulate the operations of the military by determining the composition of the arsenal is congressional. The president has no say in it. Ides in 86. Congress possesses authority over the nuclear arsenal regardless of presidential support of the U.S. who possesses no arsenal. If it would not for Congress appropriating money to Congress to choose to protect nuclear tech has nothing to do with it. Permit the president to override the Constitution. Does not require the president to be armed with the best weapons or be armed at all. It's not probable that Congress would disarm the president from a constitution protective Congress as the authority Congress defines the scope of the military vote next limits their interpretation justifies any modification of the arsenal. So an already huge topic. Next up, times when now, but the plan flips at Blake in 18. 2. Winning re-election in 2020, the Democratic House might be a good thing to give Stormy Boogie women will have to be made fully for the 2020 re-election campaign. Trump could also leave the House where there's a limit to his promises of being power could also pose tough choices of pressure from the basic after Trump's hard can also lead to overreaching Republicans abuse the Clinton Democratic leaders to hold up the awareness about the subject of his own personal gain. Withdrawal from Paris will be decided in 2020. State prevents extinction level warming flinger. And 70 the U.S. will take the emission of the decision removes the U.S. commitments to reduce the levels of temperature rising that appear the viability of life on Trump will abide by the agreement. The question of whether or not the country stays in Paris may be decided by the 2020 election. The pledge is still symbolically important to the assurance that the country will take responsibility for the mission without more U.S. participation in the critical years of avoiding dangerous levels of country slows. Wait, next off, the threat of first strike is key to allied assurance. The plan causes rapid proliferation from breaks alliances. Pain in 17. U.S. new capabilities provide unique assurance to allies fully reject the idea that non-nuclear capabilities are adequate. Their evidence is overwhelming that allies see nuclear capabilities as essential. There's no indication that allies favor convention of the U.S. which reduces roles in nuclear protective perceptions of allies, which radically the result would be the largest wave of prolapse since the dawn of the nuclear age polls in South Korea show support Japan could go nuclear overnight. Officials and Polito are considering options credible. Assurance must be a priority for the nuclear posture requirement. Japanese officials perceive as necessary damage capabilities must be with a strong counterforce. The nuclear posture remains an important metric for the assurance failure could lead to unraveling the NPT. There's an inherent linkage between deterrence and damage. The current strategy supports credible deterrence, sustaining a flexible range of plans and capabilities. Escalation control must be possible with nuclear options, including the limited that provide a proportional response level of tanks to support the damage limitation, even in the event of deterrence failure, extinction, crediting 15, the spread of nuclear specific threat to international security, nuclear war, terrorism, instability, weakening alliances, more states possession, the greater probability before man, new states we go through transition period, the lack of the Secretary has instead of use for future preventative strike, emphasizes the use of losing pressure that will use initiated nuclear crisis by playing on the brinksmanship states, increase the risk to force towards the left to resolve adversary to back out many of them have come closer future crisis result in devastating nuclear change spread to increase the risk of terrorism. The nukes involved in the regional instability states engaged in low levels of aggression. Any crisis could also result in catastrophic nuclear exchange. U.S.-Japan relations solve a host of existential crises. Armitage 16, the world is witnessing multiple challenges. Chinese emergence, Russian resurgence, ISIL are furthering the U.S. and Japan to diverse threats that are essential if the U.S. and Japan are to adapt to strategies to the shifts in security, climate change, and ecological degradation threatens the region. Japan is a world superpower, clean tech, and energy efficiency. The U.S. and Japan must evolve a resilient strategy. Hand development North Korea will continue to be a critical security concern. The business remains unstable. A factory could also stage a coup. Could die sudden instability require the close U.S.-Japan cooperation. Tokyo and Washington have together transforming the alliance into a hub for global cooperation, networking relationships, efforts to increase security cooperation with Australia, India, and European states, including the sub-development terrorism spread throughout the Asia and the U.S. and Japan. Favor an open internet space will be important to the Japan and the U.S. China ASAT has pursued large debris. The threat is growing, and it may be possible to reach understanding not treaties regarding the regulation of hostile activities in space. Next off, the executive branch of the United States to substantially increase operational restrictions on first-use nuclear strikes, issue, publicize, and enforce an executive order implementing this mandate. The Office of Legal Counsel should enforce the executive order. Executive action solves and avoids controversy. Macklin and 17 legislation could have the unintended effect, dangerous consequences that stop the president from murdering their own nuclear authority. And next out would go far away to go great negotiation concerns about the presidential impulse and to reach domestic audiences and allied countries about a powerful president. Next off, the United States federal government should substantially increase operational restrictions on nuclear weapons to only strike if nuclear weapons have been used against the United States. It competes and solves the case. Restricting first use is an all-inclusive renunciation that precludes nuclear asteroid defense, which could be effective. The count restricts it against other countries. 1976. When we refer to first use, what is the target? What is the target? We have to the same concern of the first use, the high altitude explosion, and the impact of all-inclusive legislation, including first use and kind of the ambiguities of interpretation require restrictions, negating the ability to respond to requests of legislation against first use, would deny the judgments of alternative that could also be appropriate extinction. Cooper 13, the likelihood of killer asteroid would be the collision course whether it's very high. Any object that would be in half a mile could also cause extinction. We have a texture rendezvous and to blow it up with a nuclear source of the basic and fill the nuclear blast would do the job. Some English against one negative blast could also kill. Detecting killer asteroid. We versed the most modern, sophisticated Los Alamos codes to predict next off. The United States federal government should enter prior and binding consultation with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization over whether the United States ought to substantially increase operational restrictions on first use nuclear strikes. The United States should commit to abide by the result of the consultation and advocate the adoption of the proposed mandates. It solves the case, but consultation with NATO is key to the alliance. Section 16, NATO must reassure the credibility of American commitments to essentially the general constitution to reassure NATO, formulating consensus on nuclear, eminently important for assuring allies that accepted assurance is necessary for maintaining the non-nuclear status of allies in the pillar of the NDT. The importance of the consultation should the much greater data consultation by instrumental facilitate consensus to ensure the substantive consultation supported by the acceptability, credibility of extended terms, building compromises, process later, reduce agreements, education, mutual learning, balancing where possible. U.S. leadership must greatly avoid the debate becoming an obstacle. Washington needs to be careful not to feel the fears of the U.S. to discredit the allies in a war. NATO was key to avert all existential threats. Burns in 18. NATO was at the core of the peace in Europe because NATO. Europe was limited to centuries of war. Major reason for the absence of war with Russia. The NATO was at the heart of the defense of the nuclear convention. That's a primary vehicle for deterring who now has critical basis of platform for force protection against terrorist groups in Africa and the Middle East. The critical defense of middle missile defense allies participating in coalition against IS. They play the lead roles counter-terror and NATO allies are supportive as we confront the transnational challenges, terrorism, cyber, climate change, pandemics, migration, and others. NATO is incalculable, but for force multiplied for American interest. The posture advantage NFU is not credible. Ford and 11 NFU promises are not credible. It was admitted that Moscow has been propaganda to China. NFU exploratory what this action means new deal against its program response to Chinese invasion seems inherently unbelievable that NFU would be followed by circumstances even if this is here and resolute. One might wonder whether the country would be willing to lose a war without employing the one thing that has to turn things around. All of the promises and caveats when things go bad. There is no reason to trust the self-sacrificial Russian unprecedented NFU would anything meaningful to strategic equation the country, human others. Trust that we wouldn't need it when we need it. They wouldn't trust that limited nuclear war fighting is key to deter Russia and China. NFU flips at Colby 18. Great power competitions return Russia and China revision states will press their advantage disastrous consequences of Washington. Most originally any attempt would fail and result in cost out of proportion counter the days when the U.S. could also swat away China or Russia no solve any competition with Russia and China each with the result of a nuclear saber rattling to test or resolve should Moscow seize the Baltics or Beijing Taiwan both are likely to use nukes to close the door and counterattacks. Moscow strategies escalate to de-escalate Russia challenge NATO would deploy a little man the conventional forces seize the ground threat to real or nukes attacks to seal the deal. Washington would be left with the settlement of major nuclear war Russia and nuclear forces in the DF-21 checkmate. The U.S. and Russia and China believe that the limited nuclear escalation winning their move the worst to bring maybe enormous so as the payoff from a nuclear advantage. Nukes are the ultimate trump card. Nothing is more powerful than the best way to for the actions America perfected this against the Soviet Union. The Dutch tried to leave the U.S. without any means of encouraging adversaries to exploit this gap, making nuclear war more likely. Conventional conflicts with Russia and China go nuclear. Children in 70, the relationship is stable, but there's no imbalance of the forces in Russia. Lower the threshold for the first use in a conventional conflict is not going to in their favor. This could lead to miscalculation. Putin boasts that there could also have NATO capitals. Russia find themselves on the defensive. Escalate the U.S. would respond with higher damage and nukes, and the U.S. to preserve the credibility in the alliance of China. And if you was right for the exception, losing position in conventional fight that we consider virtues of American nationals, the parties promise of 50 years of shame are behind us not admitting in a conflict over the SES. It would cross the threshold of prevent defeating in a prospect of being deterred by the populace. The plan makes the world safe for conventional war that flips miscalculation causes nuclear escalation. Bradley. In 15, the Chinese strategy consistently communicated the concerns about conventional Chinese and China to deter the atmosphere. The conventional capabilities to meet the nuclear wars, but now so can shake with the taboo and worse and more usable. The usability of conventional weapons and arms that deterrence because nation rely more on the nuclear weapons. Analysts fear global conventional arms race that open the door for large-scale conventional war to rely less on nuclear bridging. The gap the conventional capabilities reinforce the worst fears make a demonstrated willingness to use conventional power repeatedly over 20 years. Use ability conventional weapons reinforce the perception that the U.S. may strike China and Russia rely more on nukes. Canada they'll rely more conventional strikes, creating a dangerous potential for miscalculated imaging track nukes and to nuclear bomb around and cooperative bombing war on endurable and encourage compromise deterrence and psychological failure to how enemies view nukes made deterrence less stable, increasing emphasis on conventional weapons cause reveal and securely modernize, increase their rely more on nukes and the nuclear deterrence has not failed in the past 70 years. I'm going to go to the Congress advantage. Trump circumvents the plan, saying in 18, lawmakers act as political hodges of cognitive wish and the research and congressional monarchies have proven ineffective polarization is the president. The lawmakers were elected to oppose the president of the earned party military against independent legislative behavior on the military intervention. Congressional market has been an active supporter, acquiescence, safety balance, and Kosovo and Libya. The president's exercise of the monopoly power of nuclear decision by the Constitution. The president is all 24 hours a day by the football doesn't have to check with any president strongly resists micromanagement. The courts refuse to adjudicate declaring them non-justiciable political question. And if you occupies that twilight down, one no spillover polarization prevents Congress from exerting power. Walton 311 each has an incentive to pursue exchange projects not only does the pendulum oscillate with greater frequency, pursuing become more frequent polarization tends to defeat the effort to record the back powers and forward policy. Congress divided into war capabilities. The use of power to not debate oversee and refine the policy with grants and distract and advance the partisanship and hardly needs institutions that have a positive impact on foreign policy. And abroad, Dems blame Bush and Republicans blame Obama. We want to agree on the lessons or the facts. 2. Nukes aren't key. Perkovich and 10. Damage should not be blamed on the bomb. And the bomb not being used in Pearl Harbor. The contest between capitals and communism, inducing the centralization of executive power from control limited with the pure presence of secrecy and interference here to Congress. Become more responsible to fight terrorism. Administration Congress have adopted all the practices rules of horse should be reformed. These nukes were removed. Bomb power does not disappoint to the remedies, but flexible executive war power solve a bunch of existential threats. UN 70 foreign affairs are predictable and suitable regulation by legislation they demand. So decisive action under pressure for the emergency circumstance of war powers no coordinates ever held. Congress has never referred to the radical change in the system, but also seeks the national security to take advantage of window of opportunity to strike the executive needs flexibility, deliberation, completing passivity, the price of speed, and security the president can respond to prevent the terrorism provoke nations at WMD Pearl of no nuke terror Weiss in 226. Despite terrifying predictions, nukes have remained well beyond the capabilities of modern terrorists. The fear that attack would become accessible to remain only June notice their created Rio reservoir of fissile material waiting to be weaponized. The world has not experienced any close calls regarding nuclear terrorism, given the many complexities, especially for the amateur terrorists, would be expected failures. The public is aware of no attempts to construct or seal or purchase a nuclear weapon, much less historical identity. The leakage is not more problem. Pessimistic projections have now been born out of the trends have been moving the opposite expectation with fewer nukes. No modeling. Miller and Payne in 1630 evidence that U.S. adoption would lead to others to mimic the idea that the world files the U.S. is outdated, arrogant, the country to considerable evidence of failure. Progress powerful. Russia would hardly follow in any few others. Power pursue their own paths to emulate, and if you would reflect the willful detachment from the global realities perceived by such friends of foes, democracy does not solve war. Gaddock et al. In 17, the pacifying effect of democracy, evident phenomenal territory issues of efforts regarded to affect democratic pacifism and rivalry. Democratic leaders fail to resolve problems non-violently when they test the interactive relationship. That card's that interactive relationship.
Very good.
Yeah.
Alright. The 2020 DISAD, your evidence is about if Democrats won the House in the midterms, a line of it that right after the part of forced failures to live up to promises says key ones and far-fetched ones such as the border wall remain improbable even if Republicans keep control of the House and the Senate. Why would a restriction on Trump's nuclear powers mean that Democrats lose in 2020?
Because our Blake card says that Trump will spin the restriction on his executive power as the Dems overreaching on sort of his...
Yeah, so if that's true, Pelosi came out earlier this month and said that she would impeach Trump. Congress has passed the NATO...
She said the opposite. She said the exact opposite of what you just said.
Congress has also done the NATO Support Act. They've done the Russian sanctions bill that said that Trump has to do those things. Like, why aren't those things that Trump could blame?
Trump doesn't have to abide or enforce the Russia sanctions bill. The NATO Support Act was just the House saying that, hey, we think it would be better if we committed our support to NATO, but did not pass any binding restrictions on Trump. The plan does the exact opposite.
Okay, my question is why wouldn't Trump be able to blame those things or use any of those things as a reason why the Democrats
Because those aren't actual constraints on his power.
So
when there's an actual constraint on his power...
Where have you read a piece of evidence that says constraint on power is key? Your evidence is just about Trump being able to blame the Democrats on something.
Well, so the important thing is that Trump will be able to spin the plan as...
It gives Trump a boogie woman, is what your card says.
Yes.
Okay, Nancy Pelosi is already a boogie woman. House One, AOC's Green New Deal, all of those things are... That's fine. The strikes counter plan? Is this just saying that we can only initiate a strike if a strike has been initiated against us?
That's a gas thing.
Sorry, what was the question?
Okay, so in the mechanism of the counter plan, someone launches a strike and then the United States can launch a strike.
It's basically only damage limitation.
So we can do second strikes if someone launches a strike against us?
It says unless nukes have been used. That's what it says.
So if a nuke is deployed against the United States, we can then deploy a nuclear weapon?
And a nuke's deployed against the United States by a state that has nukes, we need to be able to first strike asteroids. Which is a scenario in which nukes have not been deployed against the United States.
Miller in 70... I guess I'm confused. Your plan text doesn't seem to say we could strike asteroids.
Well, no. So it does the operational NFU stuff basically in the context of other countries, which is the way that you should read that whole thing about unless a nuclear weapon has been deployed against the U.S., which means it leaves open the possibility of striking an asteroid because an asteroid can't nuke the U.S.
Asteroids don't have nukes. That's a pretty uncontroversial statement.
So we can first strike things like asteroids, but we can't first strike things like countries.
Unless
That's the counter.
They strike us. Well, then it wouldn't be called first strike.
But then it wouldn't be called first strike.
So
it does the same thing the plan does, except for asteroids.
Okay, great. That's exactly what I needed. The pain. Oh, never mind.
recently
guess it's like
didn't
Russian,
include
but it's
these
all like greenhouse because.
Oh, so I use LEDs, so they're all inside a shade.
So
I stack them vertically and then I have the lights shine horizontally.
Really interesting. How do you
I mean, it's
how do you get into that?
It's
Like,
a
what
pretty,
is the road?
it's a pretty obvious jump from debate to
Makes sense.
most people do it.
are you talking about your hydroponics farm? Is
Yes.
that? Yeah.
Did you have any background in farming before?
Yeah, I farmed in Kentucky, Costa Rica, Massachusetts.
Well, like when you were younger, or like your family?
Oh no, I grew up in the suburbs of New Hampshire. Debate made me an environmentalist, which then made me a farmer.
Oh. What do you grow?
Cool.
Besides, I mostly like veggies, like kale and lettuce and stuff. I also have a warehouse where I rent out.
Okay, the real 2 ACs.
That's kind of tight.
We can turn the live stream off and you can tell us what you really grew.
I would love more science in debate. I tell people this a lot.
You know, oddly, so do we in some debates.
I worked on that for a while. A series that's been working on that changes the standards for this field of science and commercialization.
You're just not tall.
Removes core efforts.
What?
It's used to find your own science.
Neither am I. Loser.
Oh, is it the second 2AC document?
It's the second one.
Yeah.
Is it an app against the Zoom? Does the science good?
Nope.
Policy.
Well, I mean, it could be.
Yeah.
It's policy. It's a lot of Bukowski tricks.
Good old-
They're all made up.
Good old Eliza.
That's what it's a great thing.
So the order is posture, Congress, T, ESR, consult, the pick, 2020, and allies. Okay. Oh, good. There's my timer. Okay. No credibility is our argument says that operational actions are key to signal that posture changes are effective. It is solves the deficit to all the other counter plans because there's doubt in how the U.S. creates nuclear posture, but the act resolves that because it's a unconditional commitment to how nuclear weapons operates. The key to deterrent stuff, there's zero uniqueness for this. Conceded the new warheads and missiles touted as being key to first strike are getting cut in the status quo. That's Merkel and Obama and Trump flip-flops have eviscerated deterrent credibility. That's Jerry Milo conceded squo. Aggression proves first strike doesn't turbo air. 68 to public domain special 2007 to possible first strike ambitions are believed could wage a little bit of warfare without triggering escalation threat. Rings holes is not credible enough to damage cyber attacks, covert ops, Ukraine, Baltic, Iran, Syria, Iraq, Libya, fighting directly through processes. In the link turn outweighs A is adversaries, military doctrine, internal government documents, U.S. first strike drives reactionary sign of Russian aggression, use to lose the pressures and embolden nationalism ensures nuclear preemption. That's Oligar and Zao B is norms. First strike classes global fire break moves the conventional nuclear distinction, and that pressure restraint escalation causes arms rule. If that's Tanel, the conventional shift stuff is wrong. There won't be war. Hypersonics of the squad and future development is inevitable. That is our breakdown argument. Only risk for link turn. New modernization is removing that distinction. It's causing arms racing, which lowers the conflict threshold. Only the F creates a bright line between how weapons operate. It also says that there's also no explanation as to how it causes more usability because because they have no evidence saying that the military won't use it in the status quo. Their cooperation solves residual instability. Sati, 18 what is in advance for legal knowledge, conventional arms translate the last more and more cooperative and secure relations that's for society over a period of time encouraged by parallel arms control. The pain is also trash. He's a hack. They have to read a real scenario to make this a dissent. The Congress advantage circumvention stuff is wrong. Durable fiat solves countries trust operational restrictions by Congress. That's militant waxman. Signing statements have zero or
skip that card. No circumvention. Clear 18. Trump cited eliminating fund saying the president authority most scholars, lawyers say science based no force law. Indication where the administration would like to have in the law is still the law. The no spoilers start strong in the context of first use emboldens the ability of Congress to have access to information that's currently being held secret. Also creates focus over nuclear weapons and appropriations issues, which are being splintered in the status quo. Allows for CTR effectiveness and a rebuilding of democratic processes. The nuclear weapons are key to broader cooperation. They have no evidence that is assumptive of how the plan operates. The press power stuff is wrong. It's getting destroyed in the status quo, and they plan to reorient towards Congress, which is more stable and creates better oversight processes. The arguments about not solving democracy does solve war, creates empirical consensus of empirical data says that it reduces the probability of war and creates deterrence networks and cooperation. The other arguments they don't have any defense or scenario for nuclear war causes the collapse of WD safeguards, which causes proliferation of weapons and escalation of nuclear war. The off case T, we meet their interpretation of historical crush states low and exclusive authority operations on the table throughout history. Legislation nuclear was no base in text. Congress can say how we shall buy have weapons but not only use more response to nuclear form restriction on the president's ability to use and power means capacity authority means permission. It's more precise. Taylor. United States power versus capacity to produce change authority first permission granting the distinction of what each can do and may do and they overload no operation erects after creativity ensures the always wins. It's only answer to ESR pressure changes also more substantive restriction net better for net ground substantial deterrence check against unpredictable absent default reasonability arbitrary theory causes substance crowd out war absence best the violent term link to argue diversity and top development the key to fairness and research innovation. The ESR counterplan feed on Trump comments is cheating. He's the object of arrest removes all songs with deficits while contextual literature precious fairness but asked with 17 debates over powerful literary process president sets boundaries and get out of other branches and perfect the counterplan and permanently shields the link through unison no solvency. A is operational action only Congress has appropriations power. NDA restrictions limit defunding and posture changes that's bolstered by strict program requirements. That's right for counterplan even if the counterplan is durable the posture command ensures that no one trusts the counterplan. That's Miller backlash crushes solvency links to the benefit ruler and 11 the president declared if you hostile down jump at the issue would polarizing the debate outcome would be increased cost of keeping the weapons rather persuading the U.S. is serious domestic law for president will cause observers draw the opposite conclusion and B signaling the presidency is strongly lost credibility for flops and impulse signaling it's permanent only Congress perceived durable capability decades of executive secrecy and statutory transparency make countries think the counterplan is a lie. That's key to key to reinforce credible posture and WD cooperation and seized oversight silent Congress ensures oscillating nuclear policy proactive action is key to prevent catastrophic policy mistakes. Counterplan only fails in action not effectiveness. Executive group thing causes military circumvention. That's Friday and Reef especially true now none of us doing focusing on which way you're going through from modeling through policy which discourages important communication or risk of catastrophic Congress is a crucial role to play active nuclear risk in the console counterplan console is cheating. It seals the effort shifts the debate away from the effects of the plan to its reinterpretation like it makes any unique offense heavily executable and remove the counterplan River 95 a restriction is a limitation while any reference to the process that led to place and permanent shields linked through unison and console fails. A is Parthmore. They interpret the counterplan as coercion. It's the status quo. We have a consensus of allies saying that they think that the way the counterplan operates is that we're just forcing allies to jump aboard even though they hate the way it operates causes domestic fracturing and a shift away from conventional weapons which they perceive as more stabilizing. B is trust ship. 18 credibly means keeping problems with Trump appears to be unable to do the threats to credibility include Paris statements revoking the commitment to NATO. Trump can only be trusted engaged in any consultation or dialogue any kind of country to behave this way. The allies stop believing any words we say and see is leaked. FAV 18 Trump has been played with leaks sensitive to unrelenting unauthorized disclosure demonstrating leaking on a feature not about and he is negotiations with some 92 inherent promises and consultation when affairs are related to political will as well as military differences and nuance great confusion exchange to drop the lowest and effective order between true pigeons held under extreme pressure hurry conversation causes two resources agreement between the two nations. The NATO scenarios are argument they're terrifying the status quo and that's because of nuclear ambiguity. The act clarifies how that posture operates. The picks are bad and unpredictably moves when I see speech trauma shifting the clash away from the effects of the plan. Infinite potential changes means usual air app and permanent the counterplan. Plan text doesn't specify and it's how the plan works. Process proves substantially modifies restrict words and phrases by substantially does not election or not 100% less than 90%. Perm both unifies signaling through clarification the counterplan flaw. If first uses vague, they just clarify whatever they wanted, which means that it causes circumvention and links source solvency deficits, which I'll explain here. A is signaling only unconditional and views perceived as credible exceptions to make the US appear to be lying. Appears proof states will just assume the worst. China proves 16 a state would allow the use of one or two scenario. China to the opposite because of a negative continued refusal of some scholars to even discuss use of words. High value scholars will argue the mere mention of exceptions to and if you upgrades policy and B is legal basis exceptions get lawyer to justify preemption crushes solvency. That's Brooks also links to the net benefit. What's 70 and something about prediction without additional restrictions that additional conditions tricky the exchange of interpreted expansive regulation plausible we would either pitch or redundantly stand for the proposition that the counterplan fails destroys the ocean causes extinction period. 70 nuclear arsenal could destroy it should totally destroy our ozone layer clone the remaining wooding down also protects all life on Earth from power UVs with starting to affect baby astros which destroying down breaking devastation build up astro would resemble could reassemble and the 2020 just said tons of thumpers which were really 2C and living 18 the Senate is destroyed by partisan willingness to encroach its powers, free over the study, and even over the charge with them as the House intrusion of the interpreter Congress use by deciding to protect the police control of only pass sanctioned laws on the left and right issue statements, telling the president and he'll lose now. They need to read a real unique scores from the midterms and zero link voters don't care. One is foreign policy. We'll insert a chart 8, HB 326, and 2 is issue saliency. Congress doesn't care either. A better net 14A is new. Well, hard to say. Our politicians tend to be completely ignorant. Voters don't ask about them. They don't know what to ask. But we focus on demand with only one congressional hearing. There's no impact warming. Shinny 15 over history. They've been a distinct warming with temperatures exceeding current one side. Literature conclude a recent increase in mean temperature does not appear to be unprecedented. IBC warns climate change to have severe consequences. However, the explanation heavily criticized for failing to account for natural capacity due to economic development, technological change, and human capital. Even if nations to be ambitious emission targets, efforts are likely to have little effect. Humans start to have an adaptable species. We survive the ice age with primitive technologies. No reason as to why the U.S. is key to Paris. Other countries will just fill in for the U.S. through renewable development. And the Allies just said there is zero uniqueness. That was explained the deterrence term. There's no reason as to why we aren't terrifying allies in the status quo by cutbacks on how the president operates. And the link turns outweigh is confidence building. That's all the consult stuff. Recent meetings with the major allies prove modernization is terrifying allies. Leaders fear domestic backlash, trade off with Pentagon priorities, and interpretation of rollout as coercion, which causes allied adventurism. In the more we rely on nukes, the more likely any tiny change fractures the alliance. That's Weber and Parkmore, and consensus of allied officials prove provincial and second strike shift is key to deterrence. We'll still at all 18 the first use not responsible for vulnerable allies, find credible regardless form of cast out. Arguments more plausible can make it reassure more important for allies not confidence reliability potential second strike to go and demand leaders public more emphasis conventional deterrence that are increasingly relevant AO specifically less important perception which shifting towards wide conception deterrence interviews suggest that if you would not prefer to be tolerant and if you would not prefer first any importance or reflect similar resistance burden sharing most of viewpoints or any views from them that use never to slide no case that the decision to pursue capabilities trust and expectation of first use NDT is motives military doctrine and internal government prove that the reason why they're getting terrified is because of modernization of other countries like Russia and only Russia and China, only the apps solve that, and we have evidence that's comparative. It's a bigger internal link having among and also need internal modernization poses a growing challenge credibility extended towards Japan. Why not really US talk seriously this ultimately raised question Tokyo and other allied capitals of Alaska miss generally with people's improving rapidly shifted calculation might be more salient questions have already been prominent so go in Japan see its norms. The fire break stuff is a larger internal link that was explained to the deterrent stuff now. 18 world nukes in the extended deterrence in Seoul and Tokyo call for a raise in nuclear umbrella risk for effective and efficacy of a conventional deterrence provided with durable lasting conflict as well as great zone propagation how use can result large terms of return nuclear systems highly stabilizing and provoke response.
You good?
Yeah.
Was that last card here the Thacker card?
The mount.
Yeah.
Mount. Okay. Okay. The 2020 disad, your Ambinder card says, it's hard to say because our politicians are completely ignorant of these arrangements. Voters don't ask about them. They don't know what to ask. We focused on the demand side of the equation, the nukes and how to use them with only one congressional hearing.
Yeah.
If all that's true and Congress doesn't give a shit about nukes, what does the plan do to possibly change that? That they suddenly reinvigorate all their oversight of executive war powers?
Right. So that was like what I was alluding to on the Congress stuff. So the plan does two things. One, it changes the way that Congress currently conducts itself over appropriations power or nuclear policy writ large. So appropriations power, the plan is an unconditional restriction on first strike capabilities.
Yeah,
which
I'm
removes
not
that
worried
as an
about
issue
that part. I'm worried
by which
about the
Congress
second
deliberates.
part.
Right? We have evidence that's contextual to the way that Congress thinks about nuclear policy.
You
and
do
the reason why they're
actually.
sidelined is because there's a variety of issues that distract them, right? The fact that
Wait, okay, so they're sidelined on nuclear policy because there's a bunch of issues that distract them. Those issues still exist after the plan. How do you reinvigorate control over executive war powers?
No. I'm talking about the way that they manage those problems, right? The fact that they have to manage all these different types of bombers, right, causes a lot of partisan, all these different types of like TNWs, like low yield nuclear weapons.
Two things about
all
that.
All of that causes problems.
Hold on. Two things about that. One,
breakdown in like focus.
So your argument is that they're doing all that shit now. To be clear, the plan still forces Congress to do all of that shit. And all of the random shit that they have to deal with nuclear weapons, alongside a bunch of other issues that you've said are distracting them.
The plan isn't unconditional.
What do you mean unconditional? They still have to conduct oversight of the nuclear arsenal.
Like we do not use those weapons anymore. Like we do not have those weapons, right?
What the? No, that can't possibly be true. Like you can't use them first.
That's the operational stuff, right?
You can't use them first. Those weapons still exist for second strike capabilities.
Where do you these are all assertions. We have evidence about how the plan text operates, right? It says that the way that the plan is implemented, those weapons.
Okay, so to be clear, because I think this makes all of our dissets so much better. The plan gets rid of and defunds the nuclear arsenal, just like all of it.
No, it's not disarm, right? It's how
You said you get
we
rid of those
fund-
weapons.
How we fund TNWs, right? Certain weapons, right? We'll defend as defunding, i.e., the low yield stuff. What all of our evidence talks
The
about.
SETI
right?
card that you read on the conventional turn says it might. The part you didn't underline. It might be the case that in the short term, countries divesting themselves of nuclear weapons might lean more towards greater conventional acquisitions. And then it says the only way that we'd solve that in the long term is if we created a treaty on conventional armed forces in a European model. Where have you read evidence that says that that will happen as a result of the plan?
So kind of two things. One, there's no escalation scenario for why those low-level conventional
Really
conflicts
has
happen.
nothing to do with
We
what
have
I
read a
asked.
larger internal link to that. That's the Firebridge stuff. And two, the cooperation is the answer to that. Right? We
It's
cooperate
evidence.
with the plan.
You didn't say condo, right?
No, they didn't. Clarifying, you didn't, but yeah.
When you say you were growing something inside a shipping container, do you mean like when I imagine like a transnational shipping container, like, you know, like
Yep.
one that like a food boy client, now like a box, like big ass
Yeah,
metal
like it's
thing.
the dimensions are 40 by 9 by 8 feet. I'll show you a picture.
Yeah. What's the idea behind doing it in that location as opposed to in a greenhouse?
I can grow an acre's worth of crops in a 200 square foot area by stacking.
You stack the units up.
Yeah, I have like 10 plants per square.
Uh-huh.
That's the advantage.
Yeah.
It's also in the middle of the city, so I don't have to take that much acreage.
Right. It's all LED in hydroponics.
I've built hydroponic greenhouses that I found. That's what it looks like inside.
What am I even looking at here?
Oh, so that's kale.
741.
Like, is that the, like...
What's on the inside?
It grows along the, like, walls?
Yeah, I can take
Inside.
these out. So I can move the plants around pretty easily.
Okay. Is everybody ready for order?
Pesticides, no herbicides.
Right, is it, you get a better price because it's all, like,
It's like,
organic?
it's pretty, well, it tastes better too. On certain things make it, like, my kale's very tender, so it's like good for salads. But
Mhm.
it's like,
Because it's just not exposed to the environment at all, so it has no, like, other living factors.
the factor that I find is less relevant is, so if there's more UV light, plants like, become a little more bitter because of the function of using like sunscreen. These have no UV light, just the visible spectrum, and so they're like,
Right, it's like baby photo.
I joke that they're homes.
All right, we're gonna do the pick. The ESR counter plan. The posture advantage. The Congress advantage.
You did one more time, please.
Yeah, the pick, the asteroid pick.
Yep.
The ESR counter plan. The posture advantage. The Congress advantage. Everybody good?
They had a big delay, I thought it was 9 minutes.
Yes.
Cool. The CP solves the 100% the plan says never use nuke. The CP reserves them for use against asteroids. Totally destroy Earth. That outweighs. They have no defense. Asteroids are the only existential risk. The rest of the 1AC impacts are reversible. That's a Cooper evidence. Picks are good. The narrows focus. The debate's less than plan. That's key to one clash generates nuance analysis. The core controversy of the 1AC. There's round. This is an academic debate. Rebbe in a lot. 93 very controversial rules for the nukes have been put forward, reaching for reaching missions such as deflecting asteroid target requirements would depend on whether the missions are agreed by policymakers with legitimate necessary functions of the nukes. 2. Research F forces comprehensive defense of the app. Alternatives lazy research bad plan text writing. 3. Conditionality justifies it. 4. App choice makes our pick predictable. Lazy perm do both. The least net benefit includes first use, which bans asteroids. It doesn't qualify the plan. Rather, it creates ambiguities which make first use against asteroids impossible. Thus, Miller prefer his vice admiral general and expert in nuke security perm. Do the counter plan that was above. But I'll do it here. It severs first strike. We read a competition card, the 1 and C, and they dropped it. It's an all-inclusive renunciation that refers to any time the U.S. uses nukes when not being attacked or ever specific to high-altitude atmospheric explosions such as asteroid defense. That's Miller plan. And evidence is general. That means the counter plan's plan minus prep and 16. Any use is a term that encompasses every potential use. For example, the nuke detonated in the atmosphere and the asteroid nuke's employment against the target could be destroyed without humanitarian consequence. Another example is the nuke to deflect the breakup of an asteroid scenario being cited by NASA and evidence sweeping generalizations such as any use and illegal or strategic analysis. Supporters may object, saying that they really had minor attacks on civilian areas. Board choice matters. Inaccurate phrasing can lead to different in terms of imperfect implementation, different and inadequate in compliance. Ambiguity about first use restricts the ability of the plan, and any permutation will have the restrictive effect of, and even if nuking an asteroid was still technically legal. Miller in 76, the term first use creates ambiguity. Legislation for announcing first use could be bring about the debate interpretations and further restriction and imposition about the ability to use weapons. And a crisis key to education debating the target of first use as a key controversy and they can't access offense. Specifying the plan that the app only applies to countries or a different set of targets. Solves severance as the voter makes the neck play whack-a-mole. They garner disheadlinks and CB competition. It functionally competes. 2. 1 cross-text. They're crystal clear that the plan means the U.S. can never use nukes. 2. 1 AC evidence. Every card is about a full NFU, or it means you vote neg on presumption because the plan fiat something short of their solvency evidence. Or Russia and China don't believe it, which increases the risk of miscalculation. Textual competition is a bad standard interpretation. CPs only need to be functionally competitive. Prefer it. 1. Counterplan quality. Vague plans make competition impossible. Textual competition lacks justifies word picks, lacks the right line. 2. Perm coherence. It justifies scramble perms. Not adding not to the plan kills net ground. 3. Makes cross-text and F matter debates dynamic. The next should use those moments to determine what the plan does. 4. Plan vagueness forces. Otherwise, the neg must resort to generic skills education. 5. Real world. The plan's not a bill. It's a summary. Do the time constraints. Otherwise, vote neg on presumption. There are substantial definitions irrelevant. The CP competes not because of the word restrict, because of first use nuclear strike, and the percentages makes no sense. What would 90% of an operational restriction mean? Which means contextually it is absolutely useless. The signal stuff is CP solves it. Doesn't NFU versus countries that have nukes. Their solvency deficits are about country exceptions or weapon system exceptions. China and Russia both have a common interest with the U.S. to prevent asteroid strikes, which is able to solve their Haynes evidence. Is about China dismissing their own internal NFU policy because of different exceptions. It's not about the asteroids and their 1AC solvency card doesn't make the distinction. The link to net benefit doesn't apply all of our counterplan. Perm to the counterplan cards above. True that the legal distinction is very clear. They say some nuking CPs destroys the ozone. 1. This evidence is not qualified. It's from Ranker.com. 2. Says if an asteroid has iron, then it would destroy the ozone. Asteroids form in the Kepler belt and are primarily made out of ice. Only planets which are terrestrial would actually have iron in them. So there's no scenario where this would happen. Nuke deflection is key to prevent asteroids. NASA and 7. The nuke device was the most effective means to deflect because of the large amount of energy deployed. The nuke device required the least amount of detailed info, reducing the need for detailed characterization designing about the only orbit in the approximate mass of conventional explosives were ineffective. Nukes avoid fragmentation, seal 95 by exploding a nuke weapon above its surface. Sudden heating would lead it to it being blown off above the escape speed. The recoil force would be unable to induce the required velocity change in the remnant would be forced to spread across such a wide area there would be little chance of producing a major fragmentation. Nukes solved Buckman and Golden Age for large objects larger 1 kilometer. Only nuke explosion could deliver push enough to essentially sensory change in velocity, especially if there's a little time available to affect the need to change that. Nukes reduce the chance of fragmenting the object. The ESR counterplan. It's a reason to reject the argument now the team is key to for neg round on this massive topic, and it wasn't object VI because the object of resolution is not the restrictions. The current test of competition. We're going for the posture advantage. Pen time. Not credible. Do this first here. 1, it's illogical. Adversaries will believe that the U.S. if the U.S. is back is against the wall, nuke first. 2, history. Every country that's adopted an NFU wasn't serious. Russia was propaganda. China's is opaque. India's incoherent. That's the forward evidence. 3, it turns case. Hollow promises increase the risk of miscalculation. And 19, the NFU are seen as cheap pathways to restraint. But even assuming all the countries would not adopt, which most people do not believe is feasible, even if all did in good faith, it is hard to see how the NFU would stabilize anything. It can only take a few seconds to reverse during the crisis. Anticipation of reserves will may aggravate rather than dampen the risk of escalation. Operational actions are insufficient because you can just roll the nukes back out, which means which means that other countries just think that we would still nuke them in the scenario where it was necessary. It's not solvency deficit of the counterplan. I did that above, even if the app's unconditional. Other countries don't believe the United States because their own evidence says they're defensive realists, which means that they are questionable of our intentions. 4 is that ambiguity is net better. Adversaries are used to it, which means that eroding the fire breaks is irrelevant. 4 and 11, anyone who dislikes and trusts us would never believe our NFU at 2 ever have approach could have undesirable side effects. Deliberate ambiguity play a role that can invade clarity and resolution. Dishonest position is one danger of the NFU seem to be duplicitous, undermine the ability to use signaling, including the false signals, which one needs to, or what one needs to send a signal of a restraint to tamp down on escalated dynamics, potential nuclear wars too serious to the business to make it propagandistic game ship on the basis of our policy reputation for dishonesty could be peerless and not enough benefit to outweigh the risk from entering in the future new crisis without a credibility problem. Now, the quo is stable and solves zero risk escalation. 1. In Burger impact calculus, the reason that nukes are so scary is why first strike posture prevents China or Russia from ever firing a first shot, even if modernization is continuing. Second is that eroding the fire break is good. Tactical nukes provide lower steps in the escalation ladder that deter all levels of aggression, which takes cheap shots off the table, which is the Colby evidence that throughout the quo is stable. Trying in 18, the Gerson argued the U.S. should adopt an NFU, the state-of-the-art research like said nuke superiority stabilizing parity is destabilizing the fundamental cause of war, which disagreements about the balance of power, the problems of power is the strong, is the surest guarantee or peace. That one, there's clear preponderance of power, the outcome can be predicted, the more lopsided, less likely states are to misperceive imbalances are associated with peace. That nuke superiority, diminished instability, first strike is an advantage. The president may want to conduct a first strike against the states in compliance, non-compliance with it, non-proliferation, conventional aggression, the CBW tag. The ability is necessary to deter adversaries and reassure allies. It's impossible to imagine president launching a first strike on Russia or China. The ability to credibly do so, even if the option is never employed, enhances the bargaining leverage. The user lose logic does not hold up the superior state, retain the healthy ability to retaliate. The inferior state decision launch a first would be a decision intentionally launch a nuke war against the state with a secure second strike. And this first strike, the inferior state would be guaranteed to suffer devastating retaliation, intentionally launching a war that would turn out much worse for it than itself than for its opponents. The U.S. maintains superiority or China that China would intentionally choose to start a nuke war against the U.S. does not make sense. The nuke inferior state should never launch a nuke and launch nuke wars. The empirical records show that nuke inferior states frequently back down in high state crisis. The nuke inferior states never launched a nuke war. The logic over 70 years have given us strong reason to be skeptical. Power reduces the chances for war. Now the usability turn its offense and they mishandled it. The plan causes a short-term conventional war, which goes nuclear. 1. Escalation dominance. The U.S. self-deters now out of fear of provoking nuclear retail, but the plan gives the military confidence that it can escalate conflict at the conventional level, which triggers China and Russia wars because nuke and conventional CNC are intermingled. 2 is that the quo avoids war because the perceived instability induces caution and causes cooperation, which is the Bradley evidence. They say there's no uniqueness first because but missiles are being cut right now. That's completely irrelevant to the scenario. If missiles are being cut right now, then the quo is sufficient to solve the app. Obama and Trump don't undermine deterrence. Adversaries have the doubt in the back of the mind that the U.S. would use it. They say they result in cooperation. That cooperation is completely irrelevant because other countries think that conventional weapons are more usable, which increases the risk of miscalculation. Reliance on conventional weapons increases the risk in outweighs Cooper 19. The conventional systems seem unlikely to reverse the trends that China lacking advanced weapons will rely more heavily on nuclear forces, increasing arsenal size and lowering the response time to conventional system, which in theory could reduce the danger in the second nuclear age can actually increase them. Now the Congress advantage. 0 chance of spillover. 1. Polarization. Congress doesn't use its power to debate, oversee, and refine policy, but instead grandstands, distracts, and advances a partisan agenda. The plan becomes an excuse for Republicans to have the next Benghazi hearing. That's the Walt evidence. 2. Executive privilege. Their only warrant was that they will share more information. The president doesn't give a fuck. Berman and 10. The Congress rules are insufficient to overcome the executive info monopoly and provides a structural advantage. The inaction requires converts victory. Slave over Lisa holding any counter arguments, manipulates opinions, splitting them into disputes in the executive favor. Congress is toothless in the face of executive unwilling to compromise. Holds provide fruitless in the future. Fruitless in the future. Evidence says that nuclear weapons were a manifestation of the growth of executive power, but does not reverse causal because there are only 2 things that coincided at the same time, which means the plan is not sufficient to solve. Now, press powers, they functionally dropped this dissent. They only made an assertion that press powers are weak. Now, they've not read a card for this, but they've conceded our U evidence that says that presidential authority is sufficient to solve for WMD, pro-left, and rogue states, interstate war, and terrorism. Only the executive has speed and expertise to respond, but Congress gridlocks it because they are a partisan body. They cannot effectively respond. I'm not going to read a new card here because they dropped it. It means it solves 100% of the terrorism stuff. Now, press powers are strong. Now, here's the UQ card that they don't actually have. It'll answer it. Lindsay, in 18 elections, I don't think they're going to have any impact on foreign policy. Expect far more continuity. Foreign policy is decided by the President Trump. Declared to win to be more tempting to act in foreign affairs. The things are going to look a lot like we see now. The inability of Congress to pass legislation. You'd have to overcome a presidential veto. Now, no terror. They don't solve an internal link. Their reef evidence is just a history of congressional initiatives over new cooperation. The conclusion that they highlight says that Congress has restricted cooperation with Russia and China, which means even if Congress has more power, they won't do the necessary programs to solve terror. 2 is that new terror is infeasible. States have good safeguards now. Even if terror stole a nuke, they wouldn't be able to get it past border security. There are detonation safeguards, which is the FATWise evidence, which says there's no scenario where it be used. Now, democracy, there's no modeling. 1, countries act out of self-interest. The world doesn't sit around worshiping the U.S., given that no other country has the current U.S. nuke doctrine that's paying 2 other countries don't have nukes. What nuke Tsarism is modeled, the countries at risk of backsliding are not U.S. alliances. That's Turkey, Hungary. They don't care about the plan. 3, their modeling card is just one peace activist who says pushing for an NFU here can stoke the fires of democracy abroad. What the fuck does that mean? It's a useless metaphor that they're pulling out of their ass, and it's not a warrant for why other countries would adopt the plan, but democracy doesn't have an impact. The nukes doesn't have an impact. The plan can't solve it domestically. Gerrymandering, radical inequality, Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, voter disenfranchisement, and it doesn't solve war. DPT's phenomenal territorial issues. That's the Gotsky evidence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the pick, kind of 2 questions. The signaling stuff. So like where. I understand like the rereading of the Haynes stuff, but I'm kind of curious as to like where you think you have a solvency advocate that describes the opposite. Because I understand that you like said that like
Our
our
base-
evidence isn't super high. But you don't have where have you read a piece of evidence that the plan or the counter plan, which officially, as per your own explanation, everybody would understand that we can just go out and nuke things, right?
Well, no, we can't go out and nuke things. We can go out and nuke
Well, we can
asteroids,
go
which is
out-
something that we have
we
a
can
common
go out and
interest
nuke
with other
things.
countries about.
Yeah,
Our 1NC
exactly.
Miller
We
evidence
can nuke
says
things.
that the United States should adopt a no first use versus other countries, but not against asteroids. The threshold for a solvency deficit is that you introduce a card that says China or Russia thinks that the United States having the ability to nuke asteroids is scary for them. We adopt all the same operational restrictions vis-a-vis those countries, but we retain the ability to use a nuke against an asteroid that's hurtling towards Earth.
Right. My question is, like, you do not have a portion in the counterplan text that describes, like, the distinction. The only piece of evidence you've read is this
Are you saying there's
Miller
an ambiguity over
76
what
ad
asteroid
that's
means?
like that's like, hey, by the way, asteroids are out there and we could nuke them. If
the
we
only
interpret it this way.
ambiguity
My
that
question
could
is
possibly...
my question is
Okay.
where do you think that won't either justify or signal that we can just nuke other things?
Because the word thing is different than the word asteroid. The solvency, you would have to read a card that says asteroid could be interpreted to mean China, and I don't think that is something that could ever be defensible. Asteroid means asteroid.
No.
It doesn't mean China, it doesn't mean
I
Russia,
understand, like,
and they
asteroids
know it
is-
is distinct.
I understand asteroids is included, but why wouldn't people just nuke other things, like not countries?
What do you mean? What are we going to nuke? That's not a country.
Like other assets. Or
But
just
where
nuke
are those
stuff in the
assets
atmosphere.
located? They are located within countries. We cannot nuke anything within the territorial region that encompasses China or Russia.
I have a different question. The deterrent stuff, I just want to get this straight. The explanation of the usability term is that it causes entanglement between conventional and nuclear systems. Correct?
No, the argument for the conventional turn is right now the United States is hesitant to start a nuke war or use any of its nuke assets because it knows other countries, fear the U.S. launching a nuke. When we take nukes off the table, it makes our commanders believe that we can actually use conventional weapons and keep a conflict limited.
My question is, you have explained it as, like, quote, we are self-deterring now.
It's a reason why
it gets intermingled, right?
Entanglement,
Weapon systems do.
Weapon systems are intermingled now. That's the status quo. Our argument is that intermingled weapon systems with nuke first strike is stabilizing because it means that everyone's super cautious and doesn't want to escalate because they worry that another state might think it could be a nuke that's being used first.
Okay.
I sent it. Okay, it's Consult NATO 2020 and Prolo.
NATO 2020 and the assurance.
Yeah. Okay. Everyone good? Need not going for concede the permutation just to test the combination of the consult theory arguments, just a reason to reject the argument, not the team. All the uniqueness stuff will be answered specific to Japan on the DA 2020. Concede the warming impact events. We're not going for a prolif outweighs no impact events, and the 2EC means it comes first on both magnitude and probability and time frame. Rapid acquisition makes miscalc likely flames global hotspots. 2 is it turns crisis ability. The scale of prolif makes dies more prone to miscalc. That's a chronic evidence. 3 air negative. The past 7 years of the status quo table turns a Congress advantage. Prolif threats from rogue states cause Congress to centralize more power in the executive. The Iraq war proves the allowance outweighs on magnitude. U.S.-Japan cooperation mitigates every existential threat. China war, Russia revisionism, ISIS, environmental destruction of space debris. That's the Armitage evidence. High risk of space debris accidents causes nuke miscalc. And 14 space records started nuclear war. There's a real chance of accidentally destroy satellite and prompting retaliation if debris destroys a military satellite. The U.S. could mistake a preemptive strike against its capabilities to design to strike on nuclear launches. Thanks, Korea. Very bad, very quickly. Biody loss results in extinction. Turns all impacts towards in 16 repercussions of biody. Loss of aerosphere, climate change, or nuclear conflict is incontrovertible. Ecosystem undergo irreversible shifts. A tipping point of consequence to become catastrophic for civilization. Widespread unprecedented economic instability and loss of life far more quickly than climate change. Equally destructive to the threat. Multiplied will exacerbate the conflicts and fuel. Terrorism is an existential threat. The first argument is that it's a non-unique. All of their evidence is just a bunch of speculation that says that Japan may not believe our alliance in the status quo. That is not true. We've reaffirmed our commitment to them, and they believe our first use commitments, heritage, and 18 allied assurance are strong. Japan and Korea, the 2018 NPR says to step in the good direction, placing assurance on its list at this time. House on to consider nukes. The NATO committee continues to success their job, and appreciation media bias makes all their cards suspect. Kasugian and 18 America's retreat from the world is greatly exaggerated. Opportunities of reaching global leadership, which Trump's alleged withdrawal from the mainstream liberal media are unwittingly undermined with the confidence in America's economy. Propaganda. This does not stand up to goals. Examination means large mainstream document Trump's not issue leadership. Trump record in the East Asia represents a reversion to the norm of U.S. policy. Trump has also reaffirmed U.S. allowances to Japan, South Korea, as well as Australia. Trump just
which creates a break. Patrick and 18, the liberal order does not collapse, but as it destructs, they still hold that Trump's abdication of global leadership and never iteration. Trump rattled the Europeans have hardly abandoned the Western alliance, but Trump's unpredictability is spurring them to take greater responsibility. But the link is linear. Einhorn and 17, the Japanese, like the Koreans, can never be reassured enough, especially given the developments in the regional security behooves Trump to give the address the anxieties and ensures that remains confident in the security guarantees. The next argument is that the plan results in confidence building. That is not true. All of their evidence is purely speculation and doesn't cite internal documents from Japan, which is the threshold for reading any link defense. When the United States proposed an NFU in 2016, Japan explicitly said no because they were worried about its effects on extended nuclear deterrence. This is especially true when the 2EC literally said that they defund the entire fucking nuclear arsenal. The plan triggers worst case scenario fears from allies, guarantees for Bush and 16 non-nuclear states giving the shadow of nuclear adversaries long relied on U.S. nuclear security guarantees. They've also based their security strategy on pledges including military forgo indigenous elements of nukes. The Japan confront the nuclear armed North Korea, Pyongyang regularly threats Tokyo. The U.S. allies are strongly opposed to an NFU. Any indication that the U.S. might be wavering would trigger worst case fears that the U.S. would not much undermine. Japan thinks an NFU is increased security. Federal rule sovereignty. The reason Obama did not adopt an NFU was concerned with the reaction of allies, particularly Japan. Abe personally conveyed is how did you believe that increased likelihood of conventional conflict with North Korea, China, and NFU would weaken the perceived commitment to Japan's defense and perception made adoption possible. Allies think it's credible now. White in 16 first use maybe illusory, but still taken very seriously by the allies like Poland and Japan that confront the threatening neighbors to believe that their threat is vital security. They cling to the illusion NFU would smash them and leave them feeling that they were exposed to conventional balance will keep shifting in Russia and China's way. Allies understand this all too well. Japan could be building more nukes and U.S. declaratory policy, which for rapid roll-up, especially true given the importance of declaratory policy for Japanese assurance. Robert in 14 Washington sends strong signals to Japan to declaratory policy. The linchpin of the alliance declaratory policy become particularly important in light of escalating tension with neighbors. It's necessary to make clear that the U.S. declaratory policy applies to the nuclear posture review serves as a guiding document. The document that identifies the strengthening regional deterrence and reassuring U.S. allies often felt by those who have resolved their anxieties. The next argument is that they would fear backlash. That's obviously not true. They've read no evidence about that that's specific to Japan. All the evidence that I read about answers the allied adventurism stuff. They're not going to attack China as a result of the extended nuclear deterrence. The next argument is the piece of Wolstall evidence. This is just one guy saying that it shouldn't cause fears in Japan, which doesn't really answer our link argument. It also says that burden sharing is not credible. That takes out any of their link turns to the NATO stuff, but it doesn't matter for Japan. The only way they'd rearm would be a reduction in U.S. commitments for first statements of leaders instead of the general public. Rowan 17. Japan conducted assessments regarding feasibility of developing nuclear weapons. Studies concluded Japan had the tech. The political costs for prohibitive studies contained the important caveat that Japan would not develop nuclear weapons at present, leaving the door open. There should be the deterioration of U.S. deterrence while Japanese public is nuclear. How Japan's leaders did not consider a nuclear option. Leaders make it clear the U.S. alliance and nuclear bellow advantages created. They periodically consider, but the nuclear bellow reins them in each time. It's strong now. Rowan against 17 ball. The nuclear option remains important for Japanese societies. Relied on the nuclear bellow. Such a stronger version that among the public, the leaders have found far less allergic to examining acquiring nuclear weapons. The studies conclude Japan should continue to rely on the U.S. while retaining the ability to go nuclear. Should circumstances warrant the alliance remain solid ground, the umbrella provides significant reassurance while furnishing the ambiguity to deterrence. The umbrella helps reassure Japan does not feel that it needs to acquire its own nuclear weapons. The next argument is the Higginbotham evidence that says that China modernization is bad. One, the plan has no mechanism to be able to resolve China modernizing. The thesis of the 1EC is that they're resilient is also proven by all the 2NC evidence that we read. But it's great offense for us. China modernization proves the link. Allies have responded to China's developments by calling the U.S. to strengthen its first strike posture. Their evidence concludes an NFU is bad right after they stopped cutting it. This is 2EC Higginbotham et al. In 17. Should ally concerns grow, there may be appeals for the U.S. to clarify its policy to include the implicit nuclear deterrence of conventional attacks. Now, I have question the credibility of extended deterrence. Korea or Japan support the nuclear armament is likely to grow in the future. Japan is especially worried. Oregon 17. There was concern that Washington would conclude further arms control of Chinese might change their mind about minimum deterrence. The Japanese analysts were concerned about the result of reduction in bringing the U.S. forces closer to the Chinese actual Beijing might seek parity. The result will be a Cold War through MAD. The standoff would also weaken the credibility of umbrella under U.S. defense movements. And one Japanese official noted that mad exists between the U.S. and China. Beijing could also deter Washington from intervening in the Secaucus SES and be more aggressive, lower, long, vulnerable to first strike. The Japanese are concerned with Chinese efforts to use nuclear superiority against the Japanese peace and net with an expanded Chinese arsenal. Japanese analysts feel that Beijing could prevent Washington from coming to Japan's defense. The last argument is this mount evidence. It says Japan and South Korea have called for nuclear weapons, but they disregard our conventional weapons. That's the purpose of the link. Allies don't believe conventional capabilities are sufficient, even if they are, which is the point of the pain evidence. Allied perceptions matter more than actual distribution of capabilities. Fighting 16 NFU would seriously undermine allies' confidence in the U.S. security game changers. Leaders now made the argument that the conventional force was so strong that the force would never be needed. China capabilities problem with major rethink is much tougher. Adversaries are real defeating China, but he also used nuclear force to become much harder. Conventional capabilities are eroding. The threat of first use stops the war from starting in the first place. Miller painting 16 NFU would severely shake allied confidence, and that guarantees the resumption of military dominance is questionable. The key areas confuse the deterrence and war fighting allies want to deter forces from ever taking place, compelled to wage a war and recovering the lost allies. Retaining ambiguity appears to be central to deterrence, and NFU would assure opponents that might safely ignore the U.S. response if they launch any attack, a sort of nuclear attack, where the allies would strongly oppose it. Here's another link card. Rowberry 14. Since Japan closely monitors U.S. nuclear policy, the United States must consider the implication of policy changes. Japan is a critical juncture to spend. 2013, Japan published a national security strategy. Such reflects the strategies of Tokyo's concern. Japan is surrounded by increasingly severe security environment. The guidelines emphasize Japan's uncertain security environments and the importance of U.S.-Japan alliance. The guidance states that Japan will continue to maintain U.S. extended deterrence with nuclear deterrent as a vital element. send out the doc with just the cards I read.
Yeah. Downtown.
Where do you sell the majority of your produce?
I used to sell mostly at farmers markets, but now I distribute through a wholesaler. So most of it goes to like high
In most of the San Antonio area, or is it?
Was that correct?
Yeah, it goes to Austin.
Yeah, I started it and stopped it again.
Austin, San Antonio, very close. Like an hour, 15 minutes. Kind of like becoming Texas Twin Cities.
Slowly merging?
Yeah, there's two like smaller cities in between, called New Braunfels and San Marcos, and like Grand Juliet. There's this. It goes through I-35, which is all are just kind of combining.
Seems like Texas has had a lot of population growth recently.
Oh my god.
It's don't think it's real estate.
Oh, thanks.
I promised you.
San Antonio actually didn't have
Every state income tax.
Every round.
That helps, yeah. We actually, through the 2008 recession, San Antonio didn't have extraction. Pretty unusual for the cities. Austin had a big one, but they had more luxury products like tech. San Antonio's more like I still, I mean, farming comprises a decent portion of what I do, but I don't like a kitchen meal.
Is everyone good for? Oh, sorry, Tom. Is everyone good for an order at least? Okay, so it's gonna be posture, Congress, the pick, and the assurance DA. Alright.
In a few of the office credible because it's a question of whether or not it's declaratory. The staff encourages operational changes with signals, a unique kind of shift. That's similar to evidence. The only person that links to church is Morris to you because the pick allows for that kind of exception where countries perceive what the United States is doing is secretive war making, which means that the AF's ability to solve operational shift is something that is key. The counterplan doesn't encourage those things because it allows for exceptions, means that operational shift would never happen because Congress and the executive would just allow for those kinds of exceptions to keep on modernizing nuclear weapons. Ambiguity is bad because it feeds apprehension within Washington, Russia, and China. Means that adversaries are going to cross red lines, increases the chance of miscalculation, which turns the entirety of the dissent. Nuclear modernization is the reason why the fire break is eroding now. You have read no piece of evidence that says that erosion is something that is good. Tannenwald evidence says that the modernization of conventional weapons as well as the modernization of nuclear weapons side by side leads to the way that the adversaries perceive the United States military arsenal as being dangerous. It heightens the risk of those wars going nuclear. The usability argument, non-unique. Tannenwald evidence says that PGS conventional modernization is happening now, means it causes an inevitable conventional war because of the argument above. Only modernizing alongside nuclear weapons causes it to escalate. There's a breakdown of norms, and The Zhao evidence says that U.S. modernization alongside nuclear weapons is the cause for concern in China, which will inevitably lead to miscalculation. The Oliker evidence also says that a recent Russian doctrine states that the only reason why they are modernizing conventional weapons and nuclear weapons is because of the United States military planning. The Congress advantage can see no terror impact, which is the only extension to the U evidence, means there's no impact to the war powers turn. The Berman evidence is about executive secrecy, which is the status quo. They don't assume the massive shift in power, which requires the executive to share that information for Congress so that they can activate unique oversight. The Lindsay evidence is also also only banking on a veto. The 2020 evidence proves that presidents don't actually have power now. The concession of the thumper is deadly because they are just going to reassert appropriation powers. The Mecklin evidence says that's already happening now because of their ability to defund presidential requests for modernization. The nuclear czarism is just as scary because the nuclear czarism causes countries to acquire nuclear weapons because they believe that the United States is scary. The Baker evidence and Brooks evidence says that causes a U.S. retreat because it allows for us to stoke the authoritarian fires in the United States. Democratic backsliding causes a laundry list of impacts. One of them that was conceded was North Korea war, which escalates and goes nuclear. The strike counter plan, the PICs are voting issue. Stealing gas means we have no offense. Turns debate away from the merits of the plan. Turns education and is unpredictable. They just need one advocate for nuking literally anything. We can never generate offense, and the AF would always lose. They incentivize the AF to read worse non-specific evidence. Voting AF remedies the changes. Conditionality doesn't justify those things because conditionality may justify counterplans, but not ones that steal the AF and have absolutely no literature. The Miller evidence isn't about allowing for an exception of an asteroid, but just about how in a few policies ambiguities, which if anything means that you vote on perm do the counterplan because it's not severance. The text is incoherent and is the same as the plan. Perm do the counterplan solves it. If your Miller evidence is true that first strike is vague and details would need to be worked out, the details of the plan would just be the exact same thing as the counterplan. It's just a reclarification of the signaling. Congress would debate to allow for the ability to strike asteroids, but not countries. The Sethian 18 evidence from case demonstrates that we would cooperate with other allies on why that clarification is something that is important. It's not severance because you have read a vagueness argument about our policy. We still have operational changes in the U.S. military, but maintain we can use nukes in asteroid crisis because Congress would authorize that counterplans must be textually and functionally competitive, yields better well-researched counterplans with stable text allowing the 2AC offense. Anything else artificially inflates opportunity costs and turns debates into alphabet soup to make spike perms. There's also a solvency deficit. The counterplan doesn't solve any of the AF, leaving exceptions to credibility of the policy. Russia and China think it's some a secretive war-making effort of the executive to allow for those kinds of things in the first place means that modernization happens and increases the chance of miscalculation. No impact plate. And 14 is not an asteroid bed, but a single asteroid, not 400 impacts. It's 400 predicted passes missing by the wide margin. A single asteroid that misses 100 asteroids that will all hit us. That's a somewhat significant error. To make Earth a small space is very, very big. Chance of an impact will get so much smaller once a better orbit is determined. Impact probability value translates into odds about 1 billion. The highest chances 1/6 billion chances of hitting us. The flagging asteroids. That flagging asteroids works in the 2AC evidence says that nuking them wouldn't do anything to break them up, which means that the counterplan fails to solve the only impact that was extended. The assurance is that their cards are from defense contractors and folks who wrote the NPR, which means that they are sus in the highest metric. Their only evidence these countries could do this is, or want to do this, is some random public opinion. You pull from the 1NC prefer Weber and Parthomore, but meetings with allies have expressed concerns with U.S. modernization. They think it's unsustainable and risky and causes a breakdown of the nuclear conventional distinction outweighs and is quicker. We are developing conventional weapons now, but adding to the nuclear posture means this is a deadly scenario. Allies will take a while before they proliferate, but China and Russia know the U.S. is doing this now. After turns disad because China and Russia will become more aggressive, absent in a few, which is the only internal link to pro-lift. The democracy impact always outweighs the democracy impact also outweighs because it leads to massive backsliding. The entire disad functions on allied perception and biggest internal to pro-lift. If we win that debate, then we win, and there's no environmental impact. Broke 13 global tipping points and problems just in advice to allow gradual smooth pattern ecosystem or different continents are not strongly connected organisms. The limited movement by oceans, mountain ranges, responsive ecosystem, human pressures, and differ between location diversity and ecosystem response to challenge gradual change without tipping points. The latest carries in the idea of planetary tipping points and stuff of Hollywood. Disaster blockbuster claim we're approaching the planetary environment is not upheld by evidence. Market the bigger internal link of China modernization is the only thing that the outlaws which released pro-lift concerns. China is modernizing because of fear. That was most of the case debate. Conventional weapons are credible and are credible, and the current modernization leads to allies thinking that we are trying to coerce them into some kind of nuclear arsenal, which assures that they proliferate. That was the Weber and Parthomore evidence. All of our solvency deficits to the NATO concerns the NATO counterclaim cross-apply it to this because it just talks about the way that allies in the United States have gone about these negotiations and how they feel about nuclear weapons.
741.
Yeah.
like it. Of course. Drudge Report has a headline today, question mark?
So fun. Things like this always happen.
Did you debate on the nuclear weapons topic? Basically, the ACA was like passing during the NDT.
It was quite a good dissent.
It was a really, really good
It was
dissent.
the most true topic dissent I've seen.
And it was like super, super close. Like everything was perfect for the DA.
Well, the NPR, it happened a couple months prior. This is cheap.
Wasn't really from that.
I'm glad they made that one of the 5 times.
It ended up being like 6200 debates.
Yeah. Still can't believe we settled on 6 times or 5 times.
Probably a little bit too much.
So is it 2A or 2B?
So it is someone who's responsible for both.
I'll just take it to you. Yeah.
What a more responsible decision-making body would be to take back resolutions. It's like pick someone who's particularly we don't believe in and just decide.
I think some of it is there's a time crunch. You know, it has to be you just select the topic really fast after the interview. That's the time when a lot of people were just like, then you're ready to just piece out.
Yeah.
It's going to be the pro-lip dissent, the pick, the posture advantage, the Congress advantage. Everyone good? Pro-lip outweighs one time frame. We can flip their impacts, but they can't flip ours. Plan causes immediate incentives for rapid acquisition. Use as chronic 2 turn crisis stability. Grillable pro-lip causes more nuclear dies. They're prone to miscalc. We access their accents advantage 10 times 10. 3 air neg. They've had 7 years of nuke stability. Prove the squad stable. And it's too good to mess up. There's only a risk the plan undermines it. 4, they drop the alliance impact. US Japan co-op mitigates every existential threat. China, war to Russia, war ISIS, environmental destruction, space debris. This armitage, the constrained space causes extinction. They'll take out the satellites, which means they'll think we've been first struck by other countries, which means that the NFE just goes away because we'll strike other countries, which means we also access crisis and stability. Even if they win all the turns pro-lip stuff, they have no turns alliance argument, which means that this independently outweighs because it's the quickest scenario for extinction, and it undermines nuclear czarism because it could end life on Earth, but it also intervenes at the internal link level because the fear of a nuclear strike would result in a backsliding to authoritarianism. That's the Beauchamp evidence. Now they say to prefer evidence from defense contractors. 1, not from defense contractors. 2, that's unqualified. They're just trying to sell more conventional weapons, so they have an incentive to hype up the benefits of the app. Public opinion is a good indicator because it's the litmus test for whether allies would actually build nuclear weapons because they are democratic publics and are responsive to the public's will. But even if public opinion is irrelevant, they've conceded that the elite level decision makers will still build nuclear weapons because they fear an attack by China or Russia or other countries, which means that we have an internal link. Now the conventional turn, which they're making everything on, you can't go for a link turn without any uniqueness. Well, if you conceded our heritage evidence, our Kuxan in evidence, and our Patrick evidence says that all allies are assured right now. They're just pulling this argument out of their ass. Their evidence is affected by media bias because they have an incentive. The media has an incentive to hype up how Trump's destroying the liberal order, except allies like the NPR, which is a conceded argument, or Kalaki evidence is citing internal Japanese decision makers and says that they gave a ringing endorsement from Trump's policies, which means they like the ability to erode the fire blade because they think it's the only thing that's effective at deterring China. Now they dropped the China term. The bottom other evidence says that the U.S. needs to modernize sufficiently to catch up with China. Japan views that as necessary to extend nuclear deterrence, which proves that DA turns the case faster. The only other warning is that the public opposes nuclear acquisition. We read comparative evidence that says that public opinion doesn't doesn't matter for extended deterrence, and Japanese leaders will pursue their own arsenal. The U.S. ratchets down on nuclear commitments. That's the Roe Evans prefer him. He's actually done studies on Japanese defense foreign policy where the card just says there's been behind the doors talks with allies. Second, even if they win, the allies don't like modernization. The plan way overcorrects for the era. Japan says that an NFU is critical for their security, and that they've left open a reserve option to acquire their own nukes if they doubt the credibility of the extended deterrence. Modernization might not be ideal for Japan, but it's much better than the U.S. removing all nuke and security guarantees. Their only card they have on this is a 1AC card that has absolutely no qualifications. It listed just people's names and it's people speculating, so you should heavily discount that evidence. Our white evidence says that conventional capabilities are also eroding now, which means that you have to have over-reliance on nuclear weapons, and allies think that only nuclear weapons are sufficient to solve. Democracy doesn't outweigh it. They can see that proliferation turns because it consolidates authoritarian regimes. Allied perception will concede that's key. That is our argument. They believe that nukes are necessary. Environment defense will concede that we're not going for that impact China modernization purely because of fear. You don't solve China modernization. That was above. They say that the status quo equals coercion of the nuke arsenal. I answered the conventional shift above. The NATO solvency deficit that they barely cross-applied at the bottom. They conceded that the aft doesn't result in confidence-building measures, and even if it does, our Bush evidence says that they trigger worst-case scenario plans from allies. So the plan is just them walking up to the ally, telling them we're going to abandon them, and they'll proliferate because that's not what they want. Our federal and Wilson evidence says that the allies believe that it'll increase insecurity, and our white evidence says that they think that first strike is credible, and our robbery evidence says that the plan's backlash is immediate. So confidence building would just be them fighting over the United States taking a policy decision that they disagree with. Now the pick. Permutation and textual competition. Picks are a reason to reject the argument, not that the team theory has no textual basis for competition. We don't deserve the death penalty for trying to test the app. Conditionality is just a reason why the next only burden is of rejoinder, and there's no reason that you can reject the team. There's no time trade-off or sufficient explanation here for it. Now, the posture stuff. The plan is not credible, but it does freak out our allies because they don't like it. First, it's illogical. Adversaries will believe that if the U.S. is back against the wall, they'll use nukes first. Their only answer to this is conventional shifts that operational shifts are sufficient to solve. That doesn't matter because any operational shift can just be undone. When you move the ICBMs into a bunker, you can take them out again and re-alert them, and they've conceded the framing issue that adversaries are inherently skeptical of U.S. intentions, which means that they're likely to miscalculate. Our Tetris evidence and our Ford evidence says that ambiguity is net more destabilizing, and it accounts for the advances in modernization that's happened because it means that the United States has the ability to bargain with adversaries, and our defense is more credible. Now, it doesn't turn pro-lift. Rogue states already have nukes. The only possible states that can develop future weapons are allies, which means that they won't because of U.S. assurances, which means only we access a unique scenario for pro-lift. But the status quo is stable. One, they concede you should invert your impact calculus. The reason that nukes are scary is the reason why they'll never be used. China or Russia wouldn't fire it because they would absolutely get destroyed, which is our Crony evidence, which is completely conceded. Second, they conceded that eroding the fire break is good because tactical nukes provide steps that are lower on the escalation level, which take cheap shots off the table, so Russia won't invade the Baltics or China won't take grabs at the SCS. All the conventional stuff is good. Intermingling means that they won't be used because people self-deter, and our evidence speaks to Chinese and Russian perceptions, which is the pain evidence. Now, the Congress stuff, there's no spillover polarization. Congress doesn't use its power to debate, oversee, or refine policy, but they grandstand, distract, and advance a partisan agenda. That's wall 2 is executive privilege. The plan doesn't result in more subpoenas from Congress. Now, the democracy stuff, they conceded that there's no internal link to it. Countries act out of self-interest. The world doesn't sit around worshiping the U.S. because no other country has the current doctrine. Second is that other countries don't have nukes. The countries at risk of backsliding aren't in alliances. Turkey and Hungary don't care about the plan. 3 is that they're modeling cards as a peace activist that says other people should push for an NFU here to stoke the fire of democracy abroad. That does not mean anything, but they concede there's no terminal impact of democracy. Terminal impact of democracy because they can't solve it with the United States gerrymandering, radical racial inequality, Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, and it doesn't solve war. DPT is epiphenomenal to territorial issues. There's no broader internal link to proliferation. Their card is just one peace activist that says that the nuke monarchy in the United States is bad. There's no other country that we export nukes to or other countries that would develop nukes. Any country that's at risk of proliferating is solved by the U.S. alliance.
posture.
Is there more to the order? You say Congress and posture. Is there
Congress posture, prolif, or assurance. Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Congress can see no impact to democracy. They don't have any internal. They don't have any external reason why it's bad. The posture advantage. It is credible. Our evidence is phenomenal. It says that defunding and de-alerting removes the ability for the U.S. to use destabilizing warfighting strategies, which is causing crisis in the status quo. Their arguments about why that isn't effective is all assumed by the action of the plan, which removes any capacity of the U.S. to be able to first strike other nations. That solves all the offense and reasons as to that solves all the reasons that's why they're skeptical in the status quo and proves our offense because they are skeptical for a reason, i.e. they think the U.S. is going to do something catastrophic, causes arms buildup and escalation because they want to combat the possibility threat of the U.S. They also test intentions by probing, which increase the possibility of escalation. No reason that's why ambiguity and having a capacity to bargain is net better than causing a war in the first place. The only allies prolif stuff is nonsense. Concede China and Russia have vertical prolif and increased capacity to strike the U.S. and other nations, causes user-elusive pressures and nationalist ambitions, which causes expanding of territories. They do not have an answer to our explanation of defensive realism, which is assumptive of all their arguments about how they think our evidence cites internal documents and a consensus of government officials within those nations that say the reason as to why they are aggressive in pursuing these strategies because nuclear weapons are posing a threat to them by the U.S. That is what allies are terrified of, and they don't have an explanation as to how maintaining ambiguity decreases that pressure when we have uniqueness scenario for our link turn. The arguments about status quo being stable is trash. They don't have it is trash. We'll answer it on the assurance is sad, but they also don't have a reason as to why conventional weapons are why conventional weapons are being tampered down. They are the distinction is breaking down, i.e. dual use, and they don't have a reason as to why those won't be used. They are specifically advertised as being able to be used in conventional scenarios, when i.e. the scenarios that other countries think are the ones that are safe. Only conventional shift can resolve those problems because it increases the possibility of cooperation, something that they still haven't responded to, and also bolsters the escalation run, causes low-level conflicts which doesn't escalate. They have no detailed causal chain between how a conventional conflict starts and nuclear escalation, which means even if there are wars, it's net better than having nuclear war in the first place. That's good, I think. Yeah. Prolif. All of the deterrent stuff is a massive link turn, and our evidence is phenomenal, but you should be highly skeptical about the evidence they have cited, because none of it cites how officials think in the way that they operate. They just assert that Japan or other nations think a certain way, but they don't have official statements with the exception of 2 cards, and I'll indict them later, but I'll explain our warrants. A couple of them. Allies are terrified in the status quo. That's Weber and Parthmore. It is phenomenal and way newer than any of their evidence. It says meetings happened only very recently with very high officials. They don't have evidence in that context, and reasons as to why they're terrified. Multiple reasons as to why modernization is bad. 1, fractures domestic support. Japan has a complicated relationship to nuclear weapons. Agreeing with use on ambiguity removes Abe's ability to cooperate with to maintain political support. Which link turns all of the reasons why public opinion is important. Second, it trades off with conventional weapons priority. They don't have an answer to this. They just say that they will be maintaining the status quo. But if we don't shift towards conventional weapons and stabilizing of second strike, then they think that that is decreasing, i.e. hollowing out of Pentagon priorities. That removes other foundations of the U.S. Of the alliance with Japan and other nations, which causes them to rearm because they think they need to act independently. Third is the China-Russia rearm stuff. That was on case. We are winning a larger internal link because they do not have an explanation as to how ambiguity solves for these problems, because they conceded our warrants of our evidence. They just assert that ambiguity is bad and people don't model. Doesn't matter when allies think that the U.S. is causing China and Russia to be aggressive, which causes prolif. We are the only team reading evidence about what allies have said in private meetings. They're just asserts and says that Abe one time didn't like NFU. So what? Blair evidence says that they care more about conventional and second strike weapons comparatively, and also can just get over NFU if it does cause them to get upset. Their arguments about confidence building are nonsense. They've conceded Sethi from case which says that the way we do nuclear policy is by cooperating with allies and letting them know what we're doing. This solves all of the reasons Japan would feel we are abandoning them. They have expressed concerns with modernization since they have no counterplan to solve any of our uniqueness, and I'd say it revives risky strategies that increases China modernization, which is the biggest concern cited by Japan as to why they would prolife. And that was all the defensive realism stuff from above. The Shep stuff from ESR says the allies don't trust Trump in the status quo. Even if they do trust Trump, they do not trust nuclear weapons, which are being defunded in the status quo. Still haven't responded to this predictive uniqueness. This predictive thumper says that low-yield weapons are being defunded in the status quo. It removes the ability of allies to be confident in the U.S., which proves that their link is nonsense. Only risk of our offense. The one in our card about conventional shift also never had any warrants as to why it's sufficient to solve anything. Conventional shift de-escalates environments and allows norms building. Wolfstall says that perception isn't a big deal, and the ability of the U.S. to demonstrate that we have the power is the biggest internal link. The media bias stuff is also wrong. Our indicts are better than theirs. Our evidence cites a consensus of different scholarship and is from a variety of different experts, while a variety of different experts from different fields citing what officials have said in the first place, i.e. Blair, Weaver, and Parthmore. But their evidence is from people who literally wrote the NPR, so they obviously have an internal reason to preserve those things. The arguments about why the U.S.-Japan alliance is good and prolife is good. There's no external link scenario for as to why the U.S. makes this bad, which means if we prove our arguments about the link turn, i.e. the Weaver-Parthmore stuff above, it's a reason to vote ACT because we are winning how Japan and other nations interact with the U.S., i.e. nuclear weapons causing crises within their own thought process. Our evidence is more specific to how the way the plan operates, and theirs is just assertions about the way that leaders think.
I sent our doc, y'all.
first. I thought the magnitude of the link to the dissent ended up being pretty substantial. There's a couple framing things for me that come before some of the evidence comparison questions. I think that the analysis in the 2NR on the question of who has the ability to proliferate, is it our adversaries or our allies, does frame some of my perception of the overall link arguments as I read through a lot of the evidence. I think that distinction ends up becoming more and more true, that the way that an NFU policy affects allies is substantially different than the current lack of credibility affects adversaries. And then second is the basic uniqueness argument. You guys are talking about how deterrence is being destabilized now. I think that those arguments are pretty good, but all of their evidence is specific to the specific relationships of the countries that they're isolating, Japan and South Korea specifically. They have pretty substantial impacts to the actual proliferation of those countries, so the current evidence is good, but they're also making claims about why the alliance between the United States and Japan is good. Specifically, they make a claim that's conceded in the 2AR about how it's key to prevent space debris, which causes extinction somehow. Not really fully explored, and I certainly didn't just kind of default that way, but it did frame some of my opinions that those are external impacts that are difficult for the link turn. Regarding the posture advantage, I think that for me it's tough to point to any real clear victory for either side. I think both teams are reading pretty good evidence. That's how much evidence in the 2NC on whether or not China would perceive conventional shift as more likely to cause aggression. I think that evidence is really good, probably better than the China evidence I'm seeing on the other side. But the Russia evidence from the AF I think is a little bit better. I don't really know what nuclear conflicts are likely to cause extinction, if there's any specific threshold for escalation, if Allied prolif can cause extinction, or if just Russia-United States war causes extinction. And without that basic framing argument, I end up thinking largely that the advantage is sort of a wash, but that the link to the dissent outweighs, and I kind of have that external space debris scenario. I have some other thoughts, but since it's a panel, nothing good.
I thought the risk of the prolif dissent was reasonably high and outweighed medium risk of the case. To kind of sum up my overall thoughts on the DA, I think there are definitely some issues that are going to be raising some political problems with our allies, but I'm not confident that they will be sufficient to trigger proliferation, and I think that NFU is too far of a move in the other direction, which will trigger fears enough to cause prolif, and then the impact level is all uncontested. So to kind of another way of saying that is, if the AF strategy is to be link turning the DA, it would be strategic to have a bit more defense to the original, like 1NC negative link. I think you are doing better on modernization causes fear and the plan and like internal divisive debates and all that undermines extended deterrence than you are doing on answering the argument that adopting NFU will just freak out our allies because they view it as a retraction of the nuclear umbrella or a signal of overall U.S. disengagement. And so from kind of a link versus link turn analysis, I feel like their link is quite strong and your link turn is pretty solid but somewhat mitigated by a few different negative arguments. And so overall, the balance is direction negative on the link. I thought your evidence for the modernization turn was really good. Brand new, said things that I've not seen other evidence say, seemed creative. Emory, I didn't think had great answers to this. I think they did cut into it a little bit on a couple levels. Most notably, the things that your evidence say that modernization will cause, meaning causes like essentially like fears of entanglement, and it also causes like the U.S. to oversell the need for new nuclear weapons. Like we go to Japan, we're like, hey, we need this low-yield nuclear weapon because right now there's a gap in our nuclear capabilities, and that causes like our allies to be like, hey, wait, there's a gap. You know, those things. I have more questions about whether those get to proliferation than the negative link, meaning that there is definitely a degree of allied fear that can happen without them reaching the threshold where they're like, we need to go this alone and nuclearize. And I didn't feel like your evidence quite got to the point of saying that it would spur proliferation. And so I thought that the link term was not quite on par with the magnitude of the just NFU causes prolif links. I also thought that the negative link thesis somewhat subsumed it. I mean, a core claim that is advanced by the negative is like, ultimately, at the end of the day, our threat of first use will like bracket off their existential concerns, such that no matter how shaken our allies are by other things that we are saying, as long as that's on the table, they aren't going to cross the threshold. And then kind of like smaller, but like I think you need, given that this was like one of your past arguments, I think you needed to be a little bit more thorough in the 2AR. They just kind of like indicted your ev and were like, this is from like some no-name, no-qualification people, which seems highly suspicious given that your link is to like a Taylor and Francis link. It must like surely is a journal article and such, but like.
I did answer that.
Did you? Okay.
Like a lot answered it, and then like counter-indicted, like a lot. Like in the 2AR, that was like the component was like the RF is good, here's why, and then I was like there is bad.
Oh, I understood your arguments about their authors being like paid off, or sorry, their authors being like the authors of the NPR and like in answering media bias. But the argument that I'm specifically referencing is them like indicting the source quality of that one specific card by saying that it like.
I answered that.
Okay. I just
like I don't know if they're talking about Weaver and Pathmore or Blair, but I like answered that pretty thoroughly.
They're talking about
it's a scholarship, you know, it's from official statements. I said a bunch of things, right?
Well, I'm just it's a really minor point, so I don't want to like totally derail with it. But
I was just curious. I was like,
yeah, and I am happy to discuss. But like, there are two different. There's one place where it's like media bias versus your evidence is all like hacks / like cross application of the 1EC indict of Payne and the NPR authors and whatever. And then at one point in the 2NR, they were like, hey, the AV card, which is the best card, Weber and Parthmore, in like your site for that card, you don't have any qualifications listed for those authors. And so we will then like assert that they are just kind of like two Jimmies like on the internet scribing some nonsense. And I thought that you talked a lot about like author qualifications, but it was in the first bucket, not on the second one. It's a relatively, the amount of time that I've discussed it is exceeding how important it was for my decision, but like I do want to sort of be clear about that. And if you did answer that, then it is entirely possible that I did not understand or miss that argument. Some other stuff related to this term, which I like. The reason I'm talking about it for a while is I did think that it was like the central argument of the debate. It would be useful to kind of have like evidence or an argument that got to top level uniqueness, meaning a reason that something says that proliferation is going to be coming in Japan now. Because it's kind of like to kind of like draw an analogy to like a politics debate, it's like issue specific uniqueness. It's like X thing is passing. Your evidence says that a bunch of the stuff that we're doing as it relates to nuclear modernization is undermining
Japanese confidence in the U.S. extended deterrent. And if extended deterrence is like critical to prevent proliferation, then ergo it will cause proliferation. But there's not really evidence that says that. The part of the card that I was talking about without qualifications listed is worth whatever. That card says like nuclear war, but it has two different parts to it. Part one is this is raising fears with allies, and then part two is just like nuclear modernization increases the risks of nuclear war. It doesn't really say that it will cause proliferation. And then just as a matter of execution in the 2AR, I think you need to connect this evidence a little bit more explicitly to the alliance impact, not just the proliferation impact. In truth, I believe that this argument actually applies better to the alliance than it does to proliferation. Some of the things that your evidence says modernization is bad for, like creating internally divisive debates in Japan, I see how that would perhaps complicate our ability to cooperate with them more than I see how that will then cause them to like cross the nuclear threshold. But you just be aware that like they are trying to distinguish the alliance impact from prolif and saying things like none of the other like arguments that you have answer this, and there's not really as much of a counter application in the 2AR as what you would like, and potentially with like a techie judge you could just lose on like alliance is independent. I'm not going to kind of read into the truth value here. On the posture advantage, I think that in the 2AR you would benefit from narrowing the explanation of the advantage somewhat, perhaps choosing a country, either China or Russia, and explaining your argument in that context. I think that would resolve some of the feedback that you got from Mitch that was like, I'm not sure exactly what the scenario for nuclear use is. The 1AC does have some scenarios, but kind of by the end of the debate, it's just like a generalized crisis instability, and essentially they're all equally conceded. It's just a matter of selecting one and then explaining it through that context. I thought that the neg reduced the advantage on the level of reversibility and on the level of deterrence prevents nuclear use. Reversibility, I don't think that this argument is the greatest for the neg in truth, but there's some arguments that I think we're missing here. Essentially, I think that if there is just a pledge of NFU, it's entirely worthless. Other countries assume it'll be reversed. The plan is different than that, though, because it includes operational restrictions. However, operational restrictions themselves have a reversible element to them, in that anything that is done can be eventually undone. I think the AF needs to include the argument that any undoing of operational shifts, the reason why operational shifts matter is that they take much more time to undo than a pledge, which could be like instantly reversed by a matter of statements. And so in a crisis, adversaries would know that we couldn't scale back up in time to such that like we essentially, if we were going to reverse it, it wouldn't be relevant for the immediate conflict. And the parts, to the extent that there is kind of like would ever be true fear that we would be reversing it, is just solved by fiat, because we would never actually reverse the operational change, and the operational change is very visible to other countries. But just kind of having like I think you were good on your evidence assumes declaration, operational is distinct, but you need to answer kind of the operational can be reversed as well, sub-warrant. And then I thought that the neg did okay on just deterrence solves your impact. Kronig in particular was good for the negative. I think this is another place where having a little bit of specific explanation would help, because I am kind of, in the end of the debate, wondering about how any of the AF crisis instability scenarios get over that final rung of deterrence, meaning that there's use-or-lose pressures, there's all these destabilizing postures, but ultimately, in order for there to be an AF impact, someone has to pull the trigger, and 70 years of history have suggested that people won't make that last decision because it would, make mutually assured destruction. And so there's lots of ways around that, miscalc or accidents or other things like that, and it would be a little bit more clear to me if it was explained, I think, in specifics by choosing either Russia or China.
Casey was rather thorough, so I don't
Sorry.
replay everything. Just a few things. I think that for the disad, the rebuttal explanation should probably be tied a little more to the internal warrants of that Weber card from the 1AC, using more of the, they think there's a missile gap argument, applying it to both the prolif and the alliance impacts. I think that he kind of went into the 2AR thinking that I would find a card that, explicitly ties their perception of U.S. modernization programs to other countries' modernization programs. And I don't think that evidence is really there. It would be really helpful for the AF to have that. So I think that maybe something that would be helpful in debating this dissent is just general, these specific allies really, really don't want to proliferate. That would help against some of the perception-based links, and then kind of a medium to longer term, they're scared about Chinese modernization as their primary security concern, could be a little more salient to me. I had kind of the same thoughts on the negative reducing the risk of the advantage as Casey did. I think that in terms of explaining the operational shift and reversibility, he talked about explaining the implication of it, but I also think just getting into the specifics of what operational shifts you make could be helpful there, because dismantling a weapon is obviously rather difficult to reverse, and he's portraying it as putting stuff in a bunker. So I think there's a good connection to be made there. That's we're not just putting it away, we're taking it apart. Yeah, that's what I got.
Okay, sorry, I have a few questions. So maybe the explanation of the Weaver and Parkmore evidence wasn't the in tip-top shape or something that we could do. If we would have explained it in terms of the U.S. allies right now fear that the U.S. nuclear arsenal is unreliable, the missile gap argument, and then they believe that the United States is trying to coerce them into instability. The card talks about how we often revive risky strategies, and then we try to convince our allies it's a really good idea, but our allies see those things as things that would trigger instability between great powers or whatever. Do you think if we did that explanation, it would be kind of look, this is what the dissad says is happening. They say any erosion of the U.S. nuclear deterrent or credibility would cause prolif. They have set the magnitude of the link so small that the status quo is going to trigger it, kind of thing. Do you think that's more persuasive than how we were explaining it?
So I think with just the missile gap component, you could try and go through the NEGZEV more specifically to be here are the cards that say any questioning of our reliability is what causes them to consider proliferating. And there are probably, I think there were a few cards in the neg doc that the AF could have capitalized on to be this just says it's anything. It's about, if it's about perception, then when we go to them and we say our weapons currently suck, that should cause proliferation. So I think that if you're a little more careful in drawing out this neg author is the link they read that we need to thump, and there it is. So I think that is kind of what could be more persuasive to me, that there's terminal, not any uniqueness. And then I still think having a little more impact or internal link D to that would be helpful, since the plan will still link. It is still a question of whether you're going to defend them. So you probably need some level of internal link or impact defense, so they can't go for turns the case is really big defense. So always.
Co-sign that. The one thing I'd add is there's two turns. one is missile gap. The other is what I described as entanglement. Missile gap seems like it could non-unique the DA. Entanglement, it's a little bit unclear to me why, if allies are rankled that we're trying to entangle them, their response to that is we're going to proliferate. That seems like it's a little bit more applicable to alliance, where it's just like we're doing stuff that they don't really like, and then it'll like rile them up, and then they won't cooperate with us. But like that one doesn't seem like it really accesses their internal link as much as missile gap does. So maybe just distinguishing them a little bit, applying one versus alliance and the other one versus prolif, or in a different debate collapsing to only one of them would help.
Okay. My next question is kind of about how, Casey, you had said we need a reason why prolif would be coming now, kind of just like a top level uniqueness stuff. Can we impact like the missile gap argument more with the Yargi-Milo stuff, which is like Trump has encouraged South Korea and Japan to proliferate. He has said we're going to abandon certain things. He's made a bunch of like really silly statements, and Yargi-Milo gives statements from Japanese officials as well as South Korean officials that are just like, we don't trust the Trump administration. The modernization of nuclear weapons is bad. He'll flip-flop. We don't believe anything that he says. Do you think that would make sense to you all as like at least as like a uniqueness argument? Obviously, that's not really offense.
Yeah, I mean, that explanation makes sense. The negative evidence is sort of responsive to that on the uniqueness level, but definitely the explanation is a good logical argument.
Yeah, I think Yargi-Milo, so I think the negative response is just kind of like the NPR has assured allies, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think Yargi-Milo talks about the NPR, but Yargi-Milo definitely does talk about like nuclear policy of the United States and how Japanese and South Korean officials perceive those things. The 2AC would obviously probably require just like an NPR sucks card, but like, do you think we at least have a beginning of a uniqueness argument in the 1AC for prolif is going to come now?
You just like the politics analogy, like the neg says we control issue-specific uniqueness, therefore link turns are impossible. The AF can say, well, we have non-unique to the internal link, and you made the argument that a credible extended deterrent is necessary to prevent proliferation. Ergo, if it is declining now, that will make proliferation inevitable. And so it's just kind of that little meta framing back and forth.
So you use more of the trust stuff, probably?
Well, it's more just like you need to just kind of connect the dots a little bit more clearly, where it's just like this missile gap argument is eroding the extended deterrent. Their evidence says extended deterrent is necessary to prevent proliferation. Therefore, this establishes a very low bar for the link. Any decline is sufficient, will make proliferation inevitable. I don't necessarily. It would be a nice thing to have NPR sucks cards, but it's not necessary. One thing that made Yorev really good was it's from 2019, and it says until recently everything was swimming, but things have changed. And it seems like there's a way of explaining it where you can say, okay, the NPR itself went over pretty well. It's kind of about the follow-up diplomatic moves that the U.S. has taken, where we've tried to sell it, but chosen really bad lines of pitching, where we've kind of undermined over the past couple months or whatever, since the release of the document, which was initially well received, we've fumbled basically.
Yeah.
So it's another way of just saying we have the newest card and things have changed since your evidence was written, and your evidence doesn't account for the variables that your evidence talks about. But kind of playing that up a little bit, I think, could get around their evidence, which is all 2017, 2018 cards.
Yeah, I like that. That's all the questions I have.
I do actually have one question. So one of the things I brought up in the 2AR was have quality things about the how other allies think about U.S. posture. I talked a lot about official statements and stuff, right? And I mentioned that, at least from my reading, they have 2 cards. one of them's like the lucky card, and it talks about how like Japan was like, hey, I like being hawks, and then the other card was like, hey, remember that time that Abe was not cool with an interview? But like how, I'm just kind of curious, how did you, like our evidence talks about that a lot, right? Like how allies think in meetings that we've had with officials. Like how did you determine that? Because I know they read a ton of cards saying that like asserting that allies think a certain way, but like I mean a large component of the swear was like the way we know is from what officials say. Because like I was like look at these two cards, look at my two cards, you know, the rest of them just say the same thing. I'm just kind of curious because that was like what I thought was like the large component I sat on.
For me personally, I didn't really perceive like a whole lot of difference between the two sets of evidence on what actors they were referring to, and I definitely think that it is a good debating tactic to try to identify the vital internal link and then say that your links access it and other teams don't. But I just didn't think that that was clearly the case in this debate. I thought both teams' evidence described both high-level elites and the public.
I would agree with that. Part of the lens that I was comparing their evidence to compared to that official statements are key is what are the incentives or the motivations of the Japanese officials. If it's true that they're particularly worried about Chinese conventional modernization, then they're more likely to rely more on nuclear tactics. So what they declare is informative, but not entirely, I think, telling.
My read of the ad was there was not like a huge disparity in terms of who was using higher quality information or who was representing or misrepresenting what Japanese officials are thinking. You could probably get a little deeper in saying that like the official statements they do cite are motivated for one reason or another. So if you wanted to have like a big indite of like they rely on Abe's negotiations in 2016, you could be like that was specifically motivated to achieve some political or security end. It was driven by China modernization. You do have some lines you could draw on from your ev that are like they would eventually tolerate it even if they don't like it. So like his fighting it was just him saying he'd prefer to not have changes, not that he'd like prolife as a result. So you could get deeper in indicting the specific examples, but I didn't think there was like a huge disparity in like second level source quality.
Sorry, that's just made me think of another question. The only reason that Abe said that he doesn't support a U.S. NFU when Obama proposed it is because he was scared that our nuclear deterrent, or that we would need nuclear weapons to deter North Korea and the way that they were modernizing. Do you think if we just had a card that's like conventional superiority would blow North Korea off the map and they would never strike, would be like, okay?
If
Well,
it says Japan believes it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's another question. Also, like some substantiation that that's why Abe said that. Because obviously they'd be like, Abe opposed NFU because of all these security concerns we identified.
So
I don't know how I verify that.
I think you maybe could find a card that's
Okay,
like the
okay.
reason was this and like
I was like, I don't know. Do you want me to like play a video?
I don't think it's
Like,
entirely.
nah.
I mean, I don't doubt that what you just said is
Yeah.
correct. But like not knowing anything about it, it just seemed like Japan would also be quite concerned about China.
Yeah,
Sure,
So,
yeah,
I
but
know
the
that
kind of has
Abe
the
is
China, the inroads to the China stuff, right? To be like, well, they fear Chinese modernization, we would relieve that concern. But the other concern was North Korea.